Hey everyone, Screenplay Archaeology host KiramidHead here. Just wanted to get some plugs out of the way before the new episode starts. We have now come under the umbrella of Fandom Live Media, which is also the home of the Table Reads podcast, which is a fellow unproduced script podcast, where they read said scripts out in full over several episodes. So if you like this subject matter and you're curious about a different format for it, definitely check those guys out. Not the least reason which is because you'll be paying tribute to my new podcast overlords, and that can only have a benefit. Also, check out the Shelved Film Podcast, which covers similar subject matters. They're not tied in with us, but I want you to go check them out. I want to make that recommendation because I'm just a nice guy like that. And as usual, be sure to check us out on social media on Facebook, Tumblr, and Twitter. We're on almost every means of listening to podcasts. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, a bunch of other places, especially now that I'm on a new platform which can distribute it to a whole ton of different places. So be sure to check out Spotify, Google Podcasts, stuff like that as well. And also a couple of things I want to throw in at the end. We do have a Patreon page. There's not much there. I can't really think of a rewards tier at the moment. And also, I have a Discord server that's been put together for a while, so if you want to show up and try that, as long as you're not an asshole, nothing will happen to you. You won't get kicked out. Just follow the rules. You'll be good. Check that link out down below. And with that, enjoy the episode. All right, everyone. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Screenplay Archaeology podcast. I'm your host, KiramidHead.
And this is KtuluJack.
Yes, a newcomer.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, and today we're going to be covering a subject I started 4 years ago. We're going to be covering scripts for a Highlander remake. Now, back when I did that episode, I only had the Marcum and Holloway draft. And I honestly had no idea how many had even been written at that point. It was kind of like trying to piece things together. Like, it was not the best researched episode I've done, but it was, I think I did a good job covering that script specifically. But we got a whole bunch more. We're going to be talking, we got four that have been written since that one, which I got most of them like a year after I did that episode, and I've just kind of sat on them for the longest time. But yeah, we're going to jump into it, and we're going to go into the background. But I don't want to spend too much time talking about the franchise as a whole, because we got 4 scripts to talk about.
We're going to be here a while.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Especially covering all the ins and outs of the different drafts. Now, I'll talk about the movies briefly. The original movie is great.
Yes. I really, really like this movie. It actually it made a pretty big impact on me when I saw it as a kid. Like the first time I saw it, and I actually had the VHS tape, and I wore the VHS tape out when I like over watching it so much. And of course it was on the USA Network all the time. But there's it's funny because like there's a lot of stuff in that movie that kind of bled through in my like early on in my own writing. So it was a big impact on me.
I didn't see it until later, and I actually saw a little bit of the TV show first. And I got into it largely through because Spoonie was reviewing all the movies back then, back when Spoonie did stuff.
That was a lifetime ago.
Yeah, it sure feels like it. But no, the first movie actually is really good and holds up really well. It's like this really well-made. People dump on the acting, but I think aside from like the one cop who's in a couple scenes, it's actually a pretty well-acted movie. The guy's like, "Don't move, pal."
It's incredibly well shot.
Like, oh yeah, for sure.
Like you can tell, like I'm gonna mangle this.
Russell Mulcahy, yeah,
Russell Mulcahy. You can tell because he got to start, I think, doing music videos.
Yeah, he did.
But he if anyone out there hasn't seen the movie, I highly suggest hunting down a copy of a movie called Razorback.
Yeah, that's one I've heard of. I've not seen it.
Oh, it's gorgeous. He shoots that. I mean, he shoots the outback beautifully. So much like red, blazing fire skies, and I think most, if not all of it, is like actual like on location like sky shooting. It's a gorgeous movie. But yeah, no, rewatching Highlander because I rewatched it just the other day to get prepared for it. Um, yeah, I was a little worried about it because like over the last few years, especially like over the last like 5 or 6 years, there have been a lot of like internet articles written about the movie about like how it doesn't hold up, and it's a blast. I
Oh
really
yeah.
enjoy it, and I mean, one last thing I want to say about it was kind of looking into the movie a little bit. I was shocked that the movie wasn't like a hit.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things that it's like I grew up with it and it was a big movie for me and it was a big movie for all of my friends growing up and I just assumed, I mean, I knew didn't like set the world on fire or anything, but that movie did not turn a profit on its original release.
And also the fact that it became this huge franchise. But if you look at the marketing for the first movie, especially in the US, it's not surprising it didn't do well because the poster is just this grayscale close up of Lambert's face.
Yeah, oof.
It's really, the marketing's really weird and it didn't help. And of course, the US cut missed out on like 5-10 minutes of scenes.
The movie holds up though, like especially nowadays when you just get like I'm pretty sure really the only way you can watch it now is probably just the director's cut.
Yeah, I don't
So
think they
absolutely
ever.
holds.
I think the DVDs and the Blu-rays have exclusively been that cut. But and like I mean, there's certain things that's kind of in the movie. Like the love story is like they stalk each other for 10 minutes and then they're in love.
So I have a confession to make.
Yeah,
Um, I love Highlander, but I've only seen bits and pieces of the rest of the series.
you're not missing a whole lot when it comes to the movies, at least.
I've seen, okay, so just to set the record, I've seen bits and pieces of Endgame. I want to say I've probably seen the whole movie like over the course of my life, and I've seen a handful of episodes of the television show. I've heard Highlander 3 is actually pretty good.
Eh,
Yeah, okay.
it's hard to say. I can go over these real quick.
And of course, I've heard every time I bring up Highlander 2, it's just like, wow.
Yeah, well, here's the thing, right? Is that okay? So the first movie, I think the reason it got a sequel is because it did really, really well on home video back when that actually made a difference. So the producers were like, oh, let's make a sequel to profit off of this. And they make Highlander 2, where apparently the whole thing with that is they thought the fans would want an explanation. And Russell Mulcahy wanted to do something different. And of course, Sean Connery comes back, even though it doesn't make any goddamn sense. So you get the thing with 2 is that it's bad no matter what version you watch, but it's somewhat less bad in the later editions because the theatrical cut, at least the US theatrical cut, I think the UK theatrical cut was a bit different. The Completion Bond Company took over it because they didn't finish the film in time. So it's hacked together editing where there's 2 fight scenes between Christopher Lambert and Michael Ironside, which have been cut together into one scene. There's scenes that are supposed to be flashbacks, which just happen right at the beginning of the movie. And it's all a gigantic mess. The whole planetary shield thing, it's red in that version because they just didn't give a shit about matching the lighting. So it's a complete mess. And I made sure to watch this, by the way. I made sure to watch both versions because the plot changes. Because infamously, they made the Immortals into aliens in that. And then in later edits, they backpedaled on that and said, oh, they're time travelers, which makes even less sense to me. But the later editions also, they fix some of the effects problems and they fix the editing problems. So they're better, but still not a good movie.
Isn't it a cyberpunk movie?
Yeah, it's set in like a dystopian future where the set design is very heavily influenced by Blade Runner and it's always dark because they put a shield around the planet to protect it from the ozone layer dissolving.
Yeah, it shocks me that you say that visually the movie isn't like it didn't match the lighting and visually because like Mulcahy, I'm really surprised by that considering Mulcahy, or at least at this point in his career.
Well, he wasn't in control of that version.
Okay.
A lot of like the post-production stuff was being run by the insurance company.
Oh, ouch.
And there's this whole thing about how the budget got screwed over because they got talked into filming it in Argentina, and there was like a huge inflation going on at the time, and so there was all kinds of problems. And then the later special editions, like he recolors the shield, fixes the editing and stuff like that, so it's visually less ugly and it fits together better as a movie. It's just still a bad sequel.
Can you give me a quick rundown on Highlander 3?
Highlander 3 is basically just one again, only not as good.
All right.
The villain is basically the Kurgan, only he has magic powers and they're really goofy looking special effects. There's this weird reincarnation romance with this one woman, and there's like a fight on holy ground, and McLeod's sword gets broken and he has to reforge it, and that's basically the movie. There's not a whole lot to it. It was only made because somehow, even with like the huge, like as badly as Highlander 2 bombed, like this French television company decided they wanted to make a TV show, and the TV show did well to the point where the film guys went, let's make another movie.
Yeah, I was going to ask, when does the TV show kind of come into things? I guess it was about that time.
The TV show is, okay, so Highlander 2 is 91. The TV show starts in 92 and ends in 98, and then Highlander 3, I think, is 94.
And you've been watching the TV show a little bit before this, right?
Yes, I'm most of the way through season 2. It's one of those things where I started watching it years ago and never finished, and I want to actually do it now. And it's actually pretty good for the most part. Like, you have to bear in mind it's 90s TV. The whole thing is very episodic. There's a formula to it. But it's just kind of fun to watch, and Lambert shows up in the first episode to sort of pass the torch on to the new character.
Oh, I'm totally down with 90s, like, cheesy, comfy television.
And it's pretty good. The first season is really rough because they do this thing in each season where they jump, where like the first half of the season they film it in Vancouver, and then the second half of the season they film in Paris. And when they switch over to Paris at the first season, like it upticks in quality like a huge amount, and then it kind of gets better from there. And it's a show which has all kinds of weird guest cameos in it. Like, there's an episode in season 2 where Duncan MacLeod is out jogging, and just suddenly out of nowhere, there's an evil immortal played by Rowdy Roddy Piper. And there's and like in early season 1, there's like this creepy mad scientist ER doctor played by Joe Pantoliano.
Oh man, it sounds like a series with like tons of that guy.
Yeah, there's lots. There's shitloads of it. Like Mark Singer, the Beastmaster himself, is a bad guy in an episode.
Oh my god, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time.
Yeah, like it's so weird. Like, you got like tons of like music people in it too. Like, you have the lead singer from the Fine Young Cannibals, you have Joan Jett, you have Roger Daltrey. Yeah, the TV show got 6 seasons, and I think a lot of like the reason why the franchise had any longevity at all is because of the TV show. I think if the TV show didn't happen, there would have been no more movies after 2.
That makes sense. Keeping the name alive.
Yeah, it lasted for 6 seasons. It ended. They had a spin-off show that I don't have time to go into it here, but it crashed and burned after like a single season because of all kinds of behind-the-scenes stuff. And so then they said, let's do another movie. Let's cross over the TV show with the movies, and they made Endgame, which is this special kind of hell of a movie, because if you haven't seen the TV show, you won't know what's going on with a bunch of things, but if you have seen the TV show, you're going to be calling bullshit on it like every 5 minutes.
Oh, no.
They go to the trouble to bring back Christopher Lambert, and he's barely in it, and then they make Duncan MacLeod, Adrian Paul, look like a dumbass throughout the whole thing, and it's like, okay, why are we following this guy? And they don't use any of the expanded lore from the TV show hardly at all, except for a couple of characters who show up in cameos. And so that basically killed off the franchise as a theatrical anything, because it did nothing when it came out in 2000. And then just nothing happened for a long time until 2007, when 2 movies came out. There was the direct-to-video anime film, The Search for Vengeance, which is actually pretty good. Like, it's not spectacular or anything, and it once again goes to the apocalyptic future. And also, I fucking forgot about this. In the mid-90s, there was a Saturday morning cartoon which lasted a season, which I've never seen.
Yeah, I saw some pictures of that when I was looking into this, and I'm like, oh wow, oof.
Which was yet another post-apocalyptic thing. But the anime movie, The Search for Vengeance, is actually pretty decent all told. Like, I mean, it does a post-apocalyptic thing, but it does it fairly well. It's got flashbacks. It's got all kinds of time periods in it. But it's the second best feature-length thing after the original movie, although that's not saying a whole lot. And the second thing to come out in 2007 was The Source, which is worse than 2. I can't explain it. You just have to see it. It's terrible. And it's just yet another further insult to both the movies and the TV show. And it was not long after this in 2008 that the rights were purchased by, I think it's Summit is the production company to do a remake. So basically, The Source was so bad and such a black mark on the series that it killed off the franchise as it stood at that point.
For the best, really.
Yeah, I mean, The Source was a mistake. Now, they get the rights, and the first script that was written was in 2000. It's dated January 21st, 2009 by Art Marcum and Matt Holloway. Now, I covered this one in an episode prior, like I mentioned earlier. So if you want to get like a more detailed approach to it, check out that episode since I put it out. That I put out years and years ago. So go scroll down the playlist and listen to that. But we'll talk about it briefly here. Now, we're going to get our first taste of what I like to call the IMDb game. Where we're going, because we have a bunch of different writers here, so we're going to be looking over all their IMDb's as we go. Now, Art Marcum and Matt Holloway, together they wrote something I've never heard of called Shadow of Fear. And this one's particularly interesting, by the way, because back when I did that episode, they only had 3 IMDb credits to their names.
Do you happen to remember what 3 they were? Oh, just the first 3, I guess?
It's just these first 3 here. So it was Shadow of Fear, which I've never seen. Iron Man, which I don't know what to credit them for on the first Iron Man, because that's a movie where the story they always tell about the production is that they had no script, and so they kind of made up a lot of scenes as they went.
Yeah, I've heard that too. 90% ad-lib.
Punisher Warzone, which from what I understand, they came in and did a very last-minute kind of punch-up on the action scenes, because that's a film that had a very fraught writing history where you had writers who declined credit, and then the director did a pass at it and she didn't get credit, so it's kind of hard to say on that one. And so this is the first one that was added since I did that episode. Transformers: The Last Night, which they have a screenplay and story credit on, which I don't know what to credit them for on that movie because it has like 6 writers credited on it, I think. And there was this whole writer's room they had set up for the Transformers movies, and that all fell apart.
Yeah, that would make sense. I haven't seen that one.
I saw that on the big screen. It was a colossal piece of shit. It was a very, very miserable theatrical experience. Not helped by the fact that I decided to play catch up and watch all 4 of the previous movies over consecutive days.
Oh, God.
After that, they wrote Men in Black International, which I've heard nothing good about.
Yeah, nothing. Another one that I'm just, and unlike Transformers Last Night, which I'm like, at the very least, I can look at like from what I've seen of the Last Night's like trailers, I'm like, at the very least, it probably has some cool shots in it. It might, there's some stuff in there that might be neat. Men in Black International just looks like a slog. It just looks like a built by committee slog. I don't have any interest in that one.
Yeah, and from what I've read, apparently the one producer was clashing with the director over the script and was rewriting it himself, so that was probably a mess.
Always a recipe for success.
And they have a few upcoming things, including Morbius, which was supposed to be out by now, but got delayed thanks to the whole pandemic thing. And they also wrote the Uncharted movie that is currently in production.
Yeah, so I saw that. So is their script the one that's like supposedly like is theirs the one that's being made?
They, from what I understand, they are the latest writers attached to it, and they wrote the draft that's being shot with Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg.
Oh boy!
And it's being directed by the guy who did Venom.
Well, at least it's not David O. Russell.
There's been so many scripts for that thing. I just don't know how much I care about a movie where Mark Wahlberg is playing Sully.
Yeah, that was a bad call. I don't know.
And okay, so they have a couple of upcoming things. They have apparently they wrote a version of Masters of the Universe, which is in pre-production, but who even knows what's going on with that movie anymore?
Yeah, I can't wait to see the Masters of the Universe when it finally comes out 30 years from now.
On Netflix.
Yeah.
And then they have the Untitled Transformers project, which they're credited as an earlier script, Now, I'm going to take a wild guess and say that this was something they started working on before Last Night came out, and that it has since moved in a completely different direction, and they will get a story credit at best.
I can't believe they're still trying to pump those things out, but, I mean, as far as I know, they've always made money, so I guess it doesn't surprise me.
Oh, yeah, so we're going to have to actually briefly talk about the Marcum and Holloway script right now. So I took, like, about a page of notes. And so this is the version where it opens with McLeod. Connor McLeod is already married to Heather, so it's combining her with his intended from the original movie who turned into a psycho bitch. And I should say from the beginning that all of these scripts kind of follow a similar arc in that they're fairly straightforward remakes of the original movie, focusing on Connor McLeod feuding with the Kurgan.
Yeah, all the broad strokes are going to be there.
Yeah, they just go about it in a slightly different way. And so it opens with him. They're already married, and then they go into battle. They cross the lake, and they find.
I just want to say I'm just going to shoot in every so often as we're talking about this one. I did like that one. There's a passage here where they talk about them going over the lake. Yeah, a tremendous battle cry from the men as wind now fills the sails, snapping them out and speeding them towards the enemy. McLeod and the men pull the plaid cloth bunched around their necks over their heads, becoming menacing hooded warriors. Yeah, I like that. I thought that was good. This script has a lot of like really good little passages in it.
Yeah, true. And so they cross the lake and they find that the guys are going to go kill. They've already all been slaughtered in their village, and the Kurgan is there just kind of kneeling down, and I'm not really sure what's going on here.
Yeah, he's just chilling. This was I think that this was the weakest of the Kurgan introductions.
I mean, it's interesting, but at the same time, it's like it's just not clear why he's there and what he's doing. But they fight for the first time, and he gets mortally wounded here. And also, when we go to the present day, where McLeod, he's a history professor at Fordham University in New York, which is a Jesuit university, which this is where the script kind of tries to be a little too clever, as it tries to say that the entire university counts as holy ground, and so they can't fight there, and so he's safe there.
Yeah, I thought that was a clever idea, but yeah, I wasn't a fan of the. I'm pretty harsh when it comes to speeches in movies, especially in screenplays.
Yeah.
This one wasn't very good. I didn't think.
Oh, he has the speech in front of the class.
Yeah, he's given a speech to the class about like when you should fight, and it's okay. It's not the worst thing I've ever read, but it was like. Felt a little rushed. The dialogue in this particular script isn't great.
Yeah, I mean it's functional, and so yeah, he's been out of the game since World War I. He's been trying to lead a peaceful life, and so you get this idea from the flashbacks that Heather never wanted him to fight, like she wanted him to like find like a higher purpose. And in this one, and you get like his first fight scene is there's this Napoleonic soldier that he had saved or something. That he had met who was becoming an immortal, and he saved him, and then he comes after him to kill him. And so he has to go find. This introduces the idea of the immortals hiding swords everywhere they go, so that they can always have one on hand just in case they get caught without it.
Yeah, which is a pretty neat idea, I thought.
And so he has to go find it, and he kills the guy, but he doesn't dispose of the body that great. So there's the whole police investigation that gets. This is the only one that really pulls in a police investigation of the Immortals, like in the original movie. And so there's that, and he meets Brenda, who in this owns an antique store where McLeod just happens to find Heather's Luckin Booth, which is this Scottish like pin that's meant to be a sign of love or something like that he had given her, and he finds it all these years later at her store, and that kind of brings these two together.
Yeah, a little bit of role reversal there with her being the antique dealer.
Yeah. And so she's different here. And this version is the one that, pushes the love story maybe the least, because they just kind of meet and have an attraction here, and it goes from there.
Yeah, it felt really underdeveloped in this version.
Yeah. But I mean, at least it's not like, it doesn't like push it as like true love or anything, blah, blah, blah. And also the Kurgan in all of these versions, the Kurgan has been missing for a long time. And this one, he spent the last several decades in solitary confinement in San Quentin prison, and has somehow, through growing out his beard and putting gray shoe polish in his hair has convinced him that he's aging.
Yeah. I don't know if that would work, man.
Yeah, so that part of the script is a little strange. And so in the flashbacks, we get Ramirez, him and McLeod, they meet in Edinburgh. And this is the one that kind of introduces the idea of Ramirez being the very drunk womanizing type, which is really fun to read in the script because he's just hilarious. He's always constantly quoting poetry and saying he wrote it.
Yeah.
And so they train, and he encourages him to make use of changing weapons and tactics. So in this version, we get the idea that immortals use guns here to incapacitate enemies and then go in for the beheading, which I think is a neat concept for a remake.
Now, is this the one? I think it is. This is the one where Ramirez is the not emperor, the pharaoh.
Yeah, and this one he turns out to be. We find out that he was the pharaoh Khufu right before Kurgan attacks and kills him. Well, air quotes kills him. And that was actually a really interesting idea to put in there because it's taking the idea of him being ancient Egyptian, which is literally just one line of dialogue in the original movie where he just goes, "I'm not Spanish, I'm Egyptian," and that never comes up again.
No, I like that too. I really like the idea of him being the pharaoh, and it's kind of a shame that doesn't happen again. They still work with that a little bit. Like they still put the Egyptian background in most of these scripts.
Yeah,
but he's not going to be the pharaoh again. I was a little disappointed. But.
And thematically, it's kind of an interesting idea because the pharaohs were all obsessed with eternal life, and it would explain why there's no mummy in that pyramid.
Yeah, that's true.
And then in this version, Heather, she later dies of the plague in Amsterdam, and there's this doctor character named Julian who's like an immortal healer who helps with wounds and stuff like that, and he meets him there.
Yeah, he's kind of like the he's a little bit. I feel like they were gonna go with making him this script's version of. Oh God, I'm blanking.
Castigar.
Yeah, Castigar.
None of these scripts really use much of the supporting cast until we get later on, at least.
Yeah.
And so, the immortals, we use guns. I mentioned in my notes that they use guns here. And I remember there's at least 2 write-ups on this script that exist on the internet, one of which is pretty positive and one of which is just furiously angry over the gun thing, where it's like, okay. And this one introduces the idea there's a crippled former Confederate immortal named Skinny who provides immortals with new identities in exchange for pre-gathering immunity. And so that's a really cool idea they put in here, that there's a guy who can help you, hide your identity every time you have to, go away because you're not aging.
Yeah, and we're going to see this character quite a bit. It's not always the same character, but it's not always the same person, but character will be returning.
Like the same role continues across all of them.
Yeah, to much better effect later on, I feel. But the bare bones idea, like the nuts and bolts idea is really good. I saw that you posted on Twitter the scene in which Kurgan takes care of him, and that was amazing. It's hilarious.
I remember the first time I read it because he goes to open like this long case, and you think he's gonna take his sword out like he does in the original movie, and he takes out an RPG. Because basically what Skinny does is that he basically lives in this mansion. He is always surrounded by Texas Rangers who could subdue immortals for him if need be. And you think the Kurgan's going to pull out his sword. He pulls out an RPG and blows up the building to go get his head. It's amazing. I'm like, that idea should have stuck around. Like, that would have been the trailer moment. Like,
oh, yeah.
And so McLeod knows the Kurgan's going to be on his way, so he sets up a trap. Because he's had the Kurgan sword since World War I, and he donated it to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and he lives across the street, and so he's just waiting for the Kurgan to show up, and he has a sniper rifle just ready to shoot him, which I thought was a really cool idea.
I thought that was really cool too. Where he sets up and he's looking out the window, and he looks through the scope and he sees. Isn't it like the Kurgan's like he's like doesn't he like see the Kurgan and he's like waving at him and he's got Brenda?
Yeah, that's what happens. That's why he has to leave the gun.
That's great. I can see that. That would have been a great shot.
And so he ends up having to go in there and he fights the Kurgan and 2 other immortals in the Met. And there's like this whole thing where they're like grabbing weapons out of display cases and fighting. It's a really cool fight.
That was really cool. Thoroughly. Let me just get to that real quick. Yep. I thoroughly enjoyed this fight. This was one of my favorite fights out of all the scripts. Not my favorite fight out of all the scripts, but that was one of my favorites. Museum, like museum fights or like movies that have museum locations are like really, really underutilized in my opinion. And I'm reading this thing and I'm just like, oh, this is so cool. This is really, I was totally into this part.
Yeah, it was really cool, and it catches the attention of immortals worldwide, and they all go, huh, I guess this is the gathering. And so they all come to New York for it, and they meet in Trinity Church, and which is on Broadway, and they put their swords in the baskets before they come in. And Trinity Church, if you don't recall, was the church from National Treasure.
Really?
Yeah, that's the church where they bust open the tomb and they find the treasure chamber.
Not the last time we'll be talking about National Treasure Day.
Oh, no, it will not be. And so the Kurgan coerces a cardinal into deconsecrating the church and catches the rest unarmed and takes them out. And this is, once again, they're trying to be clever here with the holy ground rules. I'm not sure if a guy waving his hands around and going, this area is deconsecrated would mean the holy ground rule doesn't count.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. However, I will say that, like, in the moment, like, while I was reading it, I did like that.
It makes the Kurgan seem really smart.
Yeah.
And MacLeod is absent as he was arrested before he could arrive. And they end up fighting to the death at Belvedere Castle in Central Park, which I thought was a really cool way to sort of bring, the past and the present together in terms of the setting.
Yes, that whole fight was awesome. Like where they start out in a subway and they're like fighting up the subway, like not the subway system, but like up the like walkways and pathways that lead up to the street. And there's this weird scene where like there's a writer in a Starbucks and he sees them fighting and he comes crashing through and it's like, all right, that was a little weird. But then they're fighting on the street, and then they roll down into Central Park, and then it becomes like a stealth bit where they're like kind of hunting each other through Central Park through the trees, and then they keep fighting, and they end up at the cat. That was awesome. That was so cool.
And so they fight, and there's a minor subplot that's going on throughout this thing, especially right towards the end, where the cop who's leading the investigation, he has cancer and he doesn't want to treat it because he says he wants to go out on his own terms, blah, blah, blah. But then he sees the final quickening in Central Park, and that sort of, gives him a new lease on life, and he goes and gets treated for it, which it's interesting that they gave a minor character that strong of an arc, but I don't know how much it really adds to it.
Yeah. And the end of the fight scene itself was, it was okay. Like the idea where MacLeod, what is it? He like, I want to say he stops fighting. He becomes one with the Force, basically, and he's like, it's all around us. The quickening is all around us, or something like that. And they kind of stop fighting, or he stops fighting, and the Kurgan gets real mad.
He fights by not fighting, essentially, because it's him trying to embrace what Heather was telling him while he was alive, that there has to be more to this than the fighting.
He's just like, no, we're watching a Highlander movie. You got to fight.
Yeah, this isn't the source where being a good person will win you the prize.
But I did like the way he killed the Kurgan. Like, I thought the killing blow itself was surprisingly, like, kind of brutal.
Yeah, he gets the Kurgan to, like, stick his sword into the wall, and then he turns around and goes, Work.
I thought what he did was he gets the Kurgan to stick the sword to the wall, and then he grabs him and, like, pulls his head through the sword.
Yeah, that's what he breaks his neck and then, like, chops his head off with the sword.
Yeah, okay, I'm down. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was cool. And so then we go to the ending, which is, oh boy.
You did not like this.
No, I did not. It ends with MacLeod. Apparently he's on the run, but him and Brenda are just hanging out casually in this pub in Scotland, which is where we met Ramirez for the first time all those years ago. And then Ramirez shows up, still alive, because apparently during his fight with the Kurgan, they stumbled into Holy Ground, and so he was able to get away. And that doesn't explain why there was a body dressed like Ramirez without its head.
Yeah, that was a little bit of an asshole.
And he says, the Gathering? That's not the Gathering. MacLeod, who said that was the Gathering? Even though, like, 12 other immortals showed up and all thought it was the Gathering.
Your little squabble was the Gathering? Yeah.
It's like, where have you been these last 500 years?
I liked it. I liked the ending. I was okay with it. This is to me, this definitely read like this was a first draft.
Yeah.
And I actually expected a lot there were parts of this that I expected more of in the sequels that didn't get picked up, and I have to wonder if that was definitely one of the things that, like, when McCollum and who was the other writer?
Marcum and Holloway.
Holloway. I wonder if that was one of the things they just kind of put in there, like, and it is. I like the idea, but yeah, the follow through was not good there.
Yeah, I get what they're going for, because I mean they want to set up for a sequel. What they really should have just done is just not pretended like that was The Gathering.
Yeah, I could agree with that.
Because I think the other scripts handled that a lot better.
But yeah, overall, I liked this script. I thought it was good, especially for a first draft. And I have read some really garbage first drafts in my day.
Oh yeah, same. I've read the first draft of J.J. Abrams' Superman Flyby. Oh God.
Ooh. But overall, no, I liked it. So yeah.
Overall, I like that script a lot. Now, sometime after this happened, it would have been, later in 2009, it was announced that Justin Lin, who had done several Fast and the Furious films, was signed on to direct it. And he had done 3, 4, and he was working on 5. So he was signed on to direct at this point. And at some point in 2010, they bring on the Wibberleys, Cormac and Marianne Wibberley, who wrote. Okay, let's look at their IMDb. Okay, there's a couple things I've never heard of. They wrote The Sixth Day with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I like that movie.
That movie, it's not the best Arnold movie, but it has one of my favorite Arnold lines in it when he tells the bad guy he should clone himself so he can go fuck himself.
Yeah.
I Spy, which is pretty funny.
That's the one with Eddie Murphy? Right?
Yeah.
Okay, Eddie Murphy and Owen Wilson.
It's actually pretty funny. It just could have done a bit more of the action. I watched that again recently just for the hell of it because it had been 18 years. And I'm like, okay, let's see how this holds up. Charlie's Angels, Full Throttle.
Nope.
Never seen it.
Yeah, I'll pass on that one.
They have a story credit on Bad Boys 2, but who knows what they actually came up with for that.
Which, I gotta say it, I love Bad Boys 2.
So do I. It's completely insane, but it works.
Yeah, it's bonkers. But,
I'm Reggie. I've come to take out Megan.
But yeah, nobody's going to be looking at Bad Boys 2 for the script.
No. But they just have a story credit, so who knows what they came up with. Story credit doesn't always mean what you think it means. National Treasure, which is pretty good.
So they did both of the National Treasure movies.
Yes, they did.
Are they credited as the screenwriters or the story by?
They're credited as screenplay for the first one, and they have both screenplay and story for the second.
Okay.
And in between those two movies, they did The Shaggy Dog with Tim Allen.
Oh, God, the eyes.
But no, National Treasure, the first one, I think is really good. The sequel is, you can tell they're struggling to put like a similar thing together. And then their last produced film credit was G-Force from 2009, which it's the one about the guinea pig superheroes.
Oh, no.
And they had a TV show they created, which lasted one season, called Common Law. And they have Based on the Character Created by credit for LA's Finest, because that's the Bad Boys spinoff about the character from Bad Boys 2, which came out last year.
Really?
Yeah, this TV show happened last year, which I guess everybody forgot about.
Yeah.
So this is, this draft, and one of their other unproduced scripts is they also did a pass on Uncharted. And what's really funny is that the Sony leak emails talking about the script that came out that was done right after theirs was talking about how, they don't want it to be, cheesy and silly like National Treasure. And I'm like, then why did you just hire the National Treasure writers? All right, so going into their Highlander script, it's dated November 7th, 2010. So this is well over a year after the previous script, and only those other two writers are credited on this. So we have a pretty complete picture of this project for about 5 years.
Yeah, I feel like over the course of these drafts, you really see like the actual like evolution of this story.
Yeah, so it's really interesting that we have this. So this one starts and it follows a similar-ish arc to to the last one, but this one influences the later scripts in certain ways, which we'll talk about as we go along. And so it opens in Scotland in 1547, where Connor MacLeod is waiting at a church for his bride, Heather, who for some reason they just refer to her as bride until she's called Heather in dialogue, which was a weird choice because it's not like it's a twist.
Yeah, some older scripts do that too.
But they're in 1547. He's waiting for her at the church. It's an outdoor church, they say. And she's late for the wedding, and they're giving him shit for it. And it turns out she's late because they didn't want to run over a rabbit that was in the road.
I thought that was kind of cute.
It's kind of funny. It made me think of Local Hero.
Wow.
Which is another movie set in Scotland. But she manages to arrive in time only for the wedding to be interrupted by messengers from the Lockhart clan who tell them that the English army is marching on, and I looked up this pronunciation, it's Pinky Clook, and they have to go and fight. And so MacLeod bids Heather goodbye, giving her a pin called a Luckin Booth, so that comes back for this draft. That was meant for the wedding and leaves. Now, this opening mainly sticks around throughout all the drafts, like it changes in details, but it's more or less the same.
Drop the rat. I don't think we see the rabbit thing again.
No, the rabbit thing is definitely a detail that disappears. And so the clan crosses, I guess they're crossing, the Firth of Forth into the lowlands in boats, and they make battle with the English. And it's in the midst of the fight when Connor suddenly feels ill and falls to his knees, his heart's thumping. So this is, the thing when two immortals are near each other, they can sense each other. And he catches a glimpse of the Kurgan, a mercenary fighting for the English and wielding a Russian Shashka saber. He heads straight for MacLeod, killing his father Ian, and then impaling MacLeod on the saber, but MacLeod shoots him with a wheel-lock pistol, which this is like one of the last instances of an immortal using a gun in any of these scripts, which keeps the Kurgan from taking his head, and then his clansmen take him back home, apparently dead, only for MacLeod to wake up again just before the funeral. And then the village drives him off, and Heather, throws the Luckin Booth at his feet, rejecting him, so that's...
Yeah. Heather throws him to the wolves in this one, right off the bat.
Yeah, Heather's just a psycho in this.
Like 6 pages, maybe.
Hey, see, I like what the previous draft did, where it put them together at first instead of having him having one fiance and then he meets her later. I like how it established that relationship and how she followed him and stayed with him for all those years.
Yeah, basically just like the movie. And then this one was like, nope, we're gonna hang a left turn here.
Now, the sequence of events mainly stays the same across the different drafts.
Yeah, this really was... I feel like more so this one than the first draft. This is really kind of the blueprint for what we'll be seeing coming up. There's a lot more here than the first one.
It being specifically that battle, which is a real historical battle, and the war was actually called the Rough Wooing. So they actually did essentially called their war the attempted rape.
Wow.
But it was an unsuccessful English attempt to conquer Scotland. But okay, so we then go to present-day Karachi, Pakistan, where MacLeod, he's alive because he's immortal, is talking to a dealer named Aban, asking him to take him to a place called Miran Shah, despite being warned of heavy Taliban presence there. And from there, we go back to 1547, where MacLeod is fighting people for money on the waterfront in Edinburgh. And he is met and challenged by Ramirez, experiencing that same sensation as before. And so after getting knocked down a few times, MacLeod throws Ramirez into the water and then dives down to get him when he doesn't resurface. And then Ramirez holds MacLeod under the surface until he breathes in the water, which doesn't kill him. So this is kind of like that scene in the original movie, but different.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm glad that this kind of came back, because that in the original movie, that's one of my favorite scenes. That's one of the scenes that I think about when I think about the original movie. Is just Connor underwater, like laughing, and the bubbles coming up. Tell that they shot for shot, they would have somebody there to put the oxygen on them. And it bugs me a little bit in the first draft that they didn't do this, because what happens in the first draft is Ramirez holds his head underwater in a barrel.
Yeah, that's what he does.
And that was a little underwhelming, but I'm glad that this came back.
And that whole conversation in the boat beforehand in that movie is hilarious, because you look like a woman, you silly Spanish peacock.
Yeah.
And Sean Connery, of all people, has to ask what haggis is.
What do you do with it?
You eat it. How revolting. But also, it's interesting that they brought this back, because it's one of those things that even the movies tend to forget about, the fact that they are effectively immortal. Like, nothing will actually kill them. Like, this whole idea that drowning wouldn't actually do anything to them never actually comes up again.
Yeah.
So yeah, so
it's a little questionable, but there's something that happens later on in one of the other drafts that, yeah, when it comes up, I'll mention it. But yeah, I am glad that they went that route.
yeah. And so when they resurface, Ramirez explains that they are immortal unless their heads are severed, and asks why he didn't kill the man he was fighting earlier. And McLeod replies that he only wants to kill the Kurgan, to which Ramirez says he'll help. And so you go back to the present day, in which Aban helps McLeod pass a military checkpoint by saying he's a journalist. And then McLeod explains to him that he's looking for a man in the foothills said to wield a Shaska saber, and Aban says that the man is called an executioner, the executioner, due to all the heads he takes. Now, Capital E. Now, one problem I have with this draft specifically, and it goes back and forth over the drafts, but in this one, it feels like the present day plot moves forward at a snail's pace.
Yes. Yeah, it does crawl.
And so McLeod calls up Rachel, who's she's essentially his adopted daughter, as we find out, she's in the original movie. And she's in London in a nice upscale apartment. It's, we get the idea that they're very close here. He asks her to give him a live infrared satellite feed of the area. And so we then go back to 1547. Okay, you see what I mean by it crawling? Because he literally has just gotten in a truck and driven.
Yeah.
And so Ramirez is telling McLeod he needs something to live for, all while drinking and whoring. And we then go back to the present day. McLeod studies the live satellite feed on his handy-dandy iPad. Aban drops him off on the mountain road, telling him to follow the path. And we then go back to 1547, where Ramirez has taken McLeod to fight in the Prince's War in Saxony. And McLeod chooses to fight on the side of the Saxons against the Holy Roman Empire because he sees that they have refugees fleeing. And this is a sequence that stays more or less intact across all of the drafts, just certain details change here and there.
Yeah, we're going to be seeing this one a lot.
And so during the fight, he meets a Viking immortal whom he slays, experiencing his first quickening, and he gains the Viking's signature skills. And this is something that you don't see in the original movie at all, but all the drafts make sure to show you is his first quickening.
Which is always that poor Viking soldier.
It's either the Viking, or in that first draft, it was an African warrior.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think it's slightly different in some of them. We'll see as we go, and I look through my notes. But so later, Ramirez, he explains the concept of the gathering and the prize to McLeod, but McLeod doesn't really care. And this is where Ramirez tells him to make sure he keeps a spare sword in every place he might go, as he never knows when he might have use of one. So that's an idea that comes back. I don't remember. Okay, we'll see as we go. And then they fight in the Franco-Habsburg War. And this is one of those things where I tried to actually do the research on these wars like I did on the Pinky Kluk battle. But like all these sequences of wars are part of like this really long sequence of wars that were all connected and lasted like a century and a half. So I couldn't really explain them to you in the time I have.
That's kind of neat, though, that they did that. It seems like they did a little bit of research there.
Yep.
And kind of linked them together like that. Like they actually followed like a through line with.
They kind of fudge some of the years as the drafts go on.
That's fine.
And he meets a pre-immortal who hasn't gained his immortality yet, fighting on their own side, and saves his life, refusing to kill him despite Ramirez's insistence. And after the battle, McLeod even offers to pay off the debts he owes to the church in exchange for promising to stay away from battle. And they then go to the monastery where the money is owed, and McLeod senses an immortal, prompting Ramirez to tell him about the Holy Ground rule, saying, "Remember Pompeii," when asked why. So that's the idea. There are definite consequences for this.
Yes, and I really like that. I've been reading these things and talking to my wife as I've been reading them, and that was a great one because we watched the movie the other day and that came up. Like she actually asked, like, what happens if they fight? Like, do they just, and in the movie, it's just kind of like they just don't. There's no real explanation. They just don't out of respect, I guess.
Yeah, I think the Pompeii thing, I think I've heard about it coming up sometime in the TV show, but I haven't gotten there yet.
But that was hilarious. That actually got a chuckle out of me.
And in Highlander 3, they have a fight on holy ground, and like lightning strikes in between them, and then the bad guy backs off.
Okay, all right.
Endgame sort of had a holy ground thing in it, but then they cut it out for the home video release because people complained. But I won't, that's too much of a thing to get into. But then they find that the man the debt is owed to is an immortal monk named Skinny who keeps track of the other immortals. So there's that character again. Now, it's key to point out that he's not crippled yet.
Right. And he's also not a Confederate soldier yet.
No, he's not. And he still is in this version. We just haven't gotten there yet. So McLeod pays him even more to reveal where the Kurgan is, and Skinny says that he's currently in Venice. And so as McLeod and Ramirez ride off, we see Skinny send a messenger bird betraying them to the Kurgan. And on the way to Venice, Ramirez insists that McLeod isn't ready for this fight yet, and so he knocks out McLeod, who wakes up in a field where they spar. And then Ramirez then offers McLeod his head, saying he'll need the 4,000 years of experience in order to defeat the Kurgan and keep him from the prize. And this is a concept that continues on through the other drafts, but I think the other drafts do it a little bit better.
Yeah, they definitely do it a lot better. Okay, again, like the nuts and bolts are here. This is almost like this is almost like a second first draft.
It is.
But yeah, so they do it better later on.
And when McLeod asks why Ramirez cares, we get the backstory of this version, which is the biggest problem with the script. The Kurgan was once the cruel pharaoh Khufu who wanted to be a god, and then sacrificed 10,000 slaves to summon the power of Ra, but the power came with a test. An immortal would be born every year, and only when all of them are killed in the final gathering will the powers of a god be granted. And Ramirez was one of the first and tried to kill him long ago, but wasn't strong enough as he became an immortal too late in life. And I believe this is where he does say he was a slave in the time of the pyramids in this. So he was a slave in this version. And I want to say in this version there's the weird implication that he's a Hebrew slave.
Yes.
Because Skinny says, "Oh, I sense some Hebrew in your accent or something," and I'm just hearing Sean Connery in my head and going, "Really?" And yeah, this whole backstory, I'm not really a fan of this whole backstory. It wraps things up in this neat little package, and it's like, no, like it explains how they know all this stuff, which you never get an answer for in the original, but I'm just not wild about it.
No, I didn't like this either. I really didn't like this. You're right. It kind of wraps it up in a neat little bow. It almost feels like a note where it was like give them give us a reason for this happening. Like come up with an origin story for the immortal, and it does not work.
And so the Kurgan is a pharaoh, but he's a Kurgan. It's only his fucking name.
Right. It's in his name.
Which is actually the name of a supposed actual culture in the steppes of what's now, Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like it might have been a real thing, or they might have been a real tribe.
Yeah, and I believe this is the draft which keeps Ramirez's original name of Takne, which I think was from like peripheral materials for the TV show.
That's kind of a cute little shout out.
And the idea of him being a slave, I think, comes from that continuity as well. But I've not been able to find like the actual source of that as of yet. And the only thing and also it raises questions about the Holy Ground thing, because why would Ra give a shit about like other religions?
Yeah. I mean, flawed and forced in.
So, can we tie Stargate into this and say that Ra's from the planet Zeist and tie this into Highlander 2?
Yes.
Well, okay, so he wants McLeod to be the one, since he's the first immortal he's met who thinks of something other than himself, which I think over all the years, I think he would have met at least one other.
Yeah.
And then McLeod thinks over the offer and accepts, but wants one last drink with Ramirez before he goes through with it. And so they go and they drink in the ruins of a monastery, and this is where Ramirez tells McLeod about his Japanese wife, Shikiko, who she's mentioned in the original movie, and in this version and in the previous script, she committed suicide to keep him from witnessing her death, which is a nice little dark twist to add to it.
Yes.
And shows McLeod the scars from where he was literally beaten to death right before he became an immortal.
Right, he was whipped to death, right?
Yeah, and that sticks around, I think, throughout the scripts, at least some of them.
Oof.
And that's around when the Kurgan shows up, Skinny having told them where they'd be somehow. Like, I don't know how he knew they would be in this area specifically, but...
I guess it's feasible. If he knows where everybody is, he probably could have sent a bird, but...
Yeah. So McLeod goes to draw his sword while still on holy ground, and then a storm starts to suddenly break out, which then goes away once he steps off it, which is a pretty cool visual. And so Ramirez then attacks McLeod to keep him safe from the Kurgan and knocks him off a cliff into a river, from which McLeod sees the Kurgan behead Ramirez. And from there, I think, is when the present-day plot finally kicks in for real.
Meanwhile, back in Pakistan.
Yeah, we go back to Pakistan, where McLeod storms the Taliban stronghold, finding the executioner who wields the Kurgan saber but is instead a Pashtun immortal. who says he got it from a Russian soldier who didn't know what he had. And then McLeod offers to walk away, but the man insists on fighting, and McLeod beheads him. And we then go to McLeod arriving in Heathrow Airport, and he finds a voicemail on his cell phone from Wellington Hospital saying that his daughter has been in an accident. And it's obviously Rachel. And he rushes over there where he meets Rachel, who fell and hurt herself, and speaks with her doctor, Brenda Wyatt. She's a doctor in this version. That continues on into the next script. And they play off the daughter thing as Rachel being out of it when she gave the information. And in the middle of this, McLeod senses a nearby immortal and just abruptly leaves the room in the middle of a conversation.
Oh, pardon me.
And Rachel's like, yeah, he tends to do that. And so McLeod tracks the sensation to the hospital morgue where a young punker girl has recently become immortal after an overdose. And he tries to help her, telling her that female immortals don't last long, which was an interesting wrinkle to add to the situation.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it kind of plays off in the idea in the original movie that we only ever see male immortals.
Yeah, and we start to see more female immortals as these scripts go on. This part though kind of brought up, I guess, it got me thinking about like how often immortals are born.
That's the thing you have to wonder about in every version.
Yeah.
Because that's something that was kind of solidified by the TV show, because in the original movie, it's very strongly, you're just kind of left to assume that McLeod was always immortal, he just didn't know it.
Right.
Because even before he's wounded, he's sensing the Kurgan.
Yeah, and that's something that, I don't know if we talked about that. And in these scripts, they bring up the idea that if you're born an immortal, you can, if you were not murdered, if you don't die a violent death, like if you just live your whole life, you'll just die, like you'll die of old age.
Yeah, that's
immortal until you're killed.
Yeah, that's an idea that came mostly from the TV show.
Okay, I was going to ask if that was exclusive to the scripts or if that was like lore from beforehand.
Yeah, I think that's lore from beforehand. That's them and I think it's meant to be a justification for why the hell Sean Connery is so goddamn old.
Hey, I'll buy it. I actually like that. I was good with that.
And okay, but so she gets scared and lashes out, wounding him with a scalpel. And she just flees. And so Brenda stitches the wound shut, and they bond a bit when she talks about how when she was a kid, she underwent open heart surgery, and she was clinically dead for 7 minutes. And I think that's an interesting sort of common ground to give them.
Yeah, I'd agree.
And she talks about how, like, she shows her scar on the third date.
Oh, God.
Which is really cringy, that line.
Yeah.
And there's definitely supposed to be an attraction there, but McLeod opts not to pursue it. And then Rachel needles him over that when he takes her home, saying that he'll need to learn how to start living once he's finally found the Kurgan. And she has pictures around the place showing that McLeod has raised her since she was a girl. And so, okay, so this script starts the idea of it being like a revenge thing against the Kurgan here, but it's a little weird because the Kurgan kills his father in battle, and and so McLeod's like, I want to get revenge against the Kurgan for killing my father and making my clan reject me. It's a little weak in terms of motivation.
Yeah.
Which the later scripts all fix.
Yes, they do.
And so a flashback training montage follows with McLeod seeking out a Japanese sword master named Miyamoto in 1615, and he learns from him over many decades, which I thought was really cool. And this whole thing is unique to McLeod in this script because every other immortal just learns how to fight by taking heads, and he decides to learn the old-fashioned way. Yeah,
which I liked a lot.
I like
all of this. All of the montages.
Yeah, I like them too, but I just, in this script specifically, I tend to question Ramirez's whole thing about how, like, oh, we don't have time to, train normally. I'm like, dude, you live forever. You can learn all the martial arts there are.
Yeah, I'll show you, Dad.
And then he sets out to learn other means of fighting, and he trains in Hakuta in 1758 Africa, and he learns how to wrestle in an Indian prison in 1862. And we then get to see McLeod's brownstone in the present day, full of swords and works of art, but no personal mementos or photographs. He then picks the stitches out of his already healed wound, because he has quick healing.
Yep.
And so we go to Brenda at the hospital, catching an interview with McLeod on TV, where he's donated the Kurgan saber to the Tower of London's museum. And we go there, where McLeod tells the curator that the single-headed eagle crest refers to Ra. God, that again.
Yeah.
Before sensing another immortal and walking off, and it turns out to be Skinny, who's rolling around in the wheelchair. And he wants to team with McLeod, saying there are only 13 immortals left and that the gathering must be near at hand. And he thinks that the Kurgan is dead, and he wants to deal with McLeod so they can be the final two. Now, the idea is that Skinny in this version, he was already an immortal, but he lost his legs at the Battle of Shiloh like he did in that previous draft.
I don't know if I'm entirely a fan of that. Is this one of the drafts? Do they have is it this draft where their scars heal too, except the scar that killed them?
I'm not sure because it goes back and forth between the drafts where they all have scars or they don't have scars. But the whole immortal body damage thing is something that was never terribly consistent because none of the wounds leave any trace except for the Kurgan's throat wound in the original movie.
Ah, yeah.
And then there's a villain who, in the TV show, where Duncan MacLeod cuts his arm off and he comes back and he has like a prosthetic hook hand. But MacLeod himself never has any scars, and they actually comment on that in one episode. And I do wonder if the idea of having the legless immortal is meant to be a means to give Jim Burns a cameo. Because Jim Burns he plays a character in the TV show who's essentially Duncan's watcher, who he's both the actor and the character are missing both legs below the knees. So I wonder if they were maybe trying to write a cameo for him into these scripts.
Oh, yeah, maybe, but that would have sucked. I assume that he was one of the good guys in the show.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that would have sucked to have him come back and play this character. Especially if it was going to be this eviest of them.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And MacLeod insists that the Kurgan is still alive and that he can feel it, to which Skinny responds by asking when the last time anyone saw him was. And this leads into a flashback to World War II era Poland, which is more or less the same across the drafts, but a bit different in each one, where MacLeod sneaks into a Nazi-occupied hotel where the Kurgan in Nazi uniform is keeping some young women hostage. They fight, and MacLeod nearly takes his head before a bombing raid interrupts them and destroys the building. And only a baby is left in the rubble when MacLeod awakes, and he takes it with him, and this is Rachel.
This was one of the things that I was glad returned throughout the multiple scripts, including the thing that's coming up.
Oh yeah, in each draft, each version of that specific scene is actually pretty interesting in each draft.
And not to get too far ahead, but I do like how it culminates in the final draft, which I feel like was the best of these.
Yes, that one's really good. And so we go back to the present day, and MacLeod goes to visit Rachel, who surprises him with a birthday cake and 2 tickets to the opera. And we then go to MacLeod getting off at a tube station only to be confronted by the Habsburg immortal he saved so many years ago, who's all pissed off at him and wishes MacLeod had killed him. And they end up fighting on the train tracks, and MacLeod wins only to get hit by the oncoming train. This scene sticks around.
Yeah, it does. Oh, a little bit, I think.
It changes like who he's fighting, what the circumstances are, but the basic idea is there. And he comes to with some emergency workers who are wheeling him away, but he gets up and runs off. And he heads to the local hospital and steals some clothes, only to run into Brenda asking her out for a drink. And they drink some wine and they connect some more on the roof of an old church.
Doesn't he throw in the line where he's all like, "How did you get here?" She's all like, "How'd you get here?" And he's like, "I took the train." No.
Yeah, I remember that line from the Thomas Jane Punisher movie.
That's right.
And so we then go to Siberia, where Skinny has gone in search of a hidden Soviet POW prison from World War II. And he and his helicopter pilot locate it, and Skinny goes inside, finding the remains of a bunch of Nazi officers. And one little detail that sticks around through every draft is the fact that there's one corpse that has a swastika pin on his uniform.
To let you know where he is, what's going on. Yeah, it's almost like reading these scripts back to back to back to back. Like that's like one line of not dialogue, but like one little line in the script that I feel like is not changed, just like word for word. Every one of them.
And they find that, and as well as the Kurgan, who is in bad shape but still alive. And Skinny makes the same deal with the Kurgan that he proposed to MacLeod and tells him that MacLeod's story about the sword coming from a Russian officer led him to the Kurgan's location. And the Kurgan accepts for the time being. And as they're leaving, he takes the helicopter pilot's leather jacket, which is supposed to be the same jacket he wears in the original movie.
Yes. And as I said earlier, I like this. It's played better in later. This part 2 is played better in later drafts, but I really, especially like comparing this to the first draft, which when I was reading the first draft and they had him, and I meant to say that earlier, but when he was in prison, I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, I mean, it didn't really work in that draft, but I'm glad that they took that idea of him being missing for all these years for having like being in prison somewhere, and they really ran with that, and that was really cool.
And the idea that they sealed him up inside a special cell just to get rid of him, and they threw away the key.
Oh yeah.
And so we get a brief scene with McLeod and Rachel where he tells her he's taking Brenda out again, and we go to Skinny and the Kurgan in the former's Paris apartment. Skinny has figured out that they're down to 12 immortals left and that one more dying will start the gathering. And the Kurgan says 11 is the same as the number of gods under Ra. Which I'm going to call bullshit on that because ancient Egyptian mythology is the most convoluted crap ever. There's never just 11 gods.
Yeah, I was going to say, that seems like a really low number.
Because every major Egyptian city had its own pantheon, essentially. And they just, when they united, they just essentially went, well, they all exist. They're all the real gods, blah, blah, blah.
That was something I felt was a little undercooked. Like when he first said that, I thought that they were going to go like in a slightly different direction. Like I thought that maybe not overdo it, but I thought that they were going to have like the final 11 like have aspects of the gods themselves. So like that would kind of play. I just felt like it was kind of it was an odd thing to throw in there, and it just be complete like it never comes up again.
Yeah,
a little bit more.
It's just one more part of that backstory I already don't like.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not. I'm just saying it's weird that they put that in here and then didn't bother really doing anything with it. But anyway.
And then the Kurgan tells Skinny to contact the remaining immortals and set up a meeting in London because, that's where McLeod is. And he says, have it set in a church, and he's putting a plan into motion. And he asks Skinny, oh, you're still an ordained priest, right? And then McLeod and Brenda go on a date watching Shakespeare in the Park where he lets slip a little firsthand knowledge about the man himself. And which was kind of a cool idea that, he had been there and he was there when the play was first performed.
Yeah, that was cool. I like that little bit.
And they walk back to Brenda's apartment and they end up in bed together because he actually asks her, is this date 2 or 3? And she goes, oh, you want to see my scar? And we then go to Southwark Cathedral where the immortals have begun to gather in response to Skinny's messages. And a Japanese businessman immortal and a teenage male immortal are the first to arrive. And there's a dialogue exchange that sticks around. Now, the actual characters are different, but the actual dialogue sticks around where the younger looking one is actually the older one. And so the guy says, you're going down, old man.
Oh my God. It got to the point later on. If I have to read that line one more time, I'm going to freak out. Because there's like 3 lines of dialogue in all of these scripts that are always the same. And it's a cute line and everything, but like reading these like back to back to back is like, oh my God, no, not anymore.
Okay, and then the Kurgan heads to the Tower of London to get his saber back, pulling a fire alarm to clear the crowd before smashing the case it's in and gutting a guard on his way out. And we briefly go back to McLeod, who is so caught up in fucking Brenda that he ignores a call from Rachel. So all this shit goes down because he's just getting laid. And then we then go back to the cathedral, which is filled full of immortals as well as one monk in the back pew. Skinny reads out the ritual of deconsecration, and the monk drops his robes, revealing the Kurgan, who slaughters everyone. And the first head he takes, it alerts McLeod to the beginning of the gathering, and he gets very woozy, asking Brenda to take him home. So the whole church massacre sticks around for this version.
And what did you think about this? Like the church massacre?
It was the same basically as the last one. Like, I mean, it's fine, but I still don't quite buy into the whole deconsecration thing.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
And I still don't buy into why would Ra give a shit about a Christian church?
Yeah.
And okay, so the slaughter continues, and Skinny takes the punker girl's head, and she's like, but you made an agreement with me. It's like, I made it with everybody.
Yeah.
And the force of that many quickenings has attracted the police, so the Kurgan and Skinny, they sneak out the back somehow. And then the Kurgan is ready to turn on Skinny, but the disabled immortal tells him about Rachel in exchange for his life. And we then go to McLeod's brownstone, where he gathers his weapons and briefly explains what's going on to Brenda. And then he tells her he's a monster and gives her a key when she doesn't believe him before leaving. And Brenda uses it, finding McLeod's armory and a scrapbook detailing his life with Rachel over the years, which convinces her of the truth. And McLeod follows his immortal sense, so it's his spidey sense now, realizing he's heading for Rachel's apartment, where he finds her held at sword point by the Kurgan. He makes McLeod drop his swords and kick them over, but cuts Rachel's throat anyways, and the fight begins. So wow, what a bastard.
Yeah.
And that's something that kind of sticks around through the drafts, is Rachel dying, but it's always a different way to do it.
Yeah, it didn't really work for me in this one.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, well, what did you expect to happen?
It's a little tried. You know what I mean? We've seen that sort of stuff before.
And it's still better than her death in Endgame, where she gets randomly blown up 5 minutes in.
Yeah, so that's what ends up happening to her, huh? Because years, like, it's like, okay, well, bye.
Well, in the movie, Connor is saying no matter what happens tonight, he's leaving for good.
Yeah, so she, like, gets away, I guess.
It goes badly for McLeod, who escapes by throwing himself out the window, crashing into a car on the street. And he's found by Brenda, who encourages him to get up and go with her, and she's brought a bunch of his weapons with her in the car. And they're pursued by the Kurgan, who is giving a ride by Skinny in his van. The handicap access van of doom. And they end up fighting on Tower Bridge, which them fighting on a bridge is something that sticks around for a decent amount of time in these. And then McLeod gets the Kurgan saber stuck in the wall before snapping his neck and then beheading him. And so he gets that quickening. And then Skinny tries to take McLeod's head while he's still off balance from the massive quickening that follows, but Brenda knocks him out with one of McLeod's maces.
Yeah.
And we then go to some time later with McLeod and Brenda getting married in Scotland, and Skinny gets locked up in Brookston prison for life. And he says, "You can't lock me up for life. You have no idea how long that's going to be."
I know, it ends on a joke.
Wah, 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 wah.
Yeah. I was like, no. I really didn't like this ending.
He gets locked up with Tom Hardy from Bronson.
Oh, God.
No, but yeah, that ending, I mean, it's interesting that it's an ending where the prize just isn't won.
Yeah.
Yeah, nothing happens because Skinny's still alive. And McLeod doesn't care about the prize because he never did.
Yeah, that's true. Huh.
So yeah, this one just ends on kind of a limp note. McLeod finally got married. Yay.
Yeah, but there was a lot of stuff in this one that I did like. I know we were kind of ragging on the Pakistan stuff earlier because it really does. You're absolutely right. Like it's stop, go, stop, go, stop, go. Wow, he drives his truck for a page and a half and nothing. He calls Rachel and that's it. You can just skip all that. You don't need that. But that I do like that idea of like him going there and like the executioner having the Kurgan sword, and that sets things in motion for later scripts.
Yeah, that's a concept that's in all of them from here on out.
Yeah. I mean, like I think that there was I'm not going to say a lot that I liked about it, but I did like it. Like overall, it still is good. That ending and the raw stuff. Oh
yeah, for me, it's a good script where the bad stuff is just bad enough that kind of knocks it down. That's how I would describe it. Now, there's not a whole lot of production info in between these two drafts, and the only reference I've seen to the Wibberleys Draft, outside of just knowing the script existed because their names were on the later drafts, it's in a reference to this next writer coming on board, and that was Melissa Rosenberg, who was announced that would be joining the project on February 9th of 2011. Now, her draft is dated March 29th, 2011, so she worked on this for about a month after that announcement was made. Now, let's play the IMDb game on her. Now, her writing... Yeah, her writing credits are quite extensive. She did a lot of TV through the 90s. Like, she did an Outer Limits episode.
I was going to say, I saw the Outer Limits in there, and I was like, oh, cool.
Hercules' Legendary Journeys, The Magnificent Seven, Ally McBeal, the Birds of Prey TV series from the early 2000s.
Yeah, I saw that one too.
And film-wise, she adapted the Twilight books to film. Now, that's all she's done film-wise, and I don't really blame her for those because there's only so much you can do of that source material.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really blame her for that.
And from what I understand, Stephanie Meyer had some degree of control over them, and I know for a fact that she took even more control over the two Breaking Dawn movies because she got pissed off about certain changes in the third one. Because I was reading about that on TV Tropes a while back, but I don't know the full story there.
Yeah, you got me there. But I gotta say, when I was browsing through Wikipedia and I saw, oh, she did all of the Twilight movies.
And she was a big part of the early seasons of Dexter before the show got bad.
Yeah.
And she was the showrunner for all 3 seasons of Jessica Jones. So that's cool.
Yeah.
I haven't seen season 3 yet, but
no, I haven't either, but the first season I thought was really good.
Oh, the first season was fantastic. Season 2 lost me a little bit in the back half, and I never finished it, but it wasn't bad. But no, it was a good show, and I remember when this was announced, there was a lot of like angry comments because every article was Twilight writer hired to do Highlander remake, and people were so furiously pissed off about it. And I'm going to say right now, I actually like this script.
Yes, I do too.
This is one of my favorites, actually, of the bunch.
Yeah, it's not my favorite, but yeah, it's definitely of the 5, it's up there.
Yeah, of the 5, it's up there. I think she has some of the more interesting ideas. But let's jump into it. So there's going to be stuff that carries over from the other scripts. And it opens in Scotland. This time it's 1545. So they kind of historically fucked up here because 47 is the date for the battle. But Connor MacLeod, he's about to be married, but is interrupted by the word arriving of the English marching on Pinkie Cleugh. He departs, saying goodbye to his bride-to-be Heather. And the exchange with the Luckenbooth is different here. He tries to give it to her, but she gives it back to him, saying, "You have to give it to me on our wedding day." And on the battle, gone.
Is this the first time that that on the very first page the back and forth? No, I guess not. Because there's like a back and forth between Connor and his father, and I think his brother that shows up. I thought it started here, but I guess it starts in the next script.
There is one here, but it's not the same. Yeah. They kind of talk back and forth, and there's like another character in there too in this one. But it's this one. If there's one thing about this draft where I'm just like, it's the fact that in the flashback scenes at the beginning, they're all talking in phonetically written out accents.
Yeah,
I'm not a huge fan of that. Okay, we go to the battlefield where he gets that sensation of an immortal approaching, and he meets the Kurgan, who's a mercenary fighting for the English. And he kills MacLeod's father, Ian, and he fights MacLeod, who manages to slice his neck before the Kurgan impales him. And then the Kurgan is about to take MacLeod's head before he gets staggered by a volley of arrows, and MacLeod's clansmen take him from the field.
That was something that I do want to mention that did kind of bug me about this script. I think this is the one. The fight, because this is when I really started to notice it in this one. The fight dialogue isn't great.
Oh, let me scroll down to that, see what it is.
The Kurgan and Connor are fighting, and it's right after Connor like takes a slice out of the Kurgan's neck, and the Kurgan's all like, "You put a mark on me," and Connor's like, "I'll do worse," and Kurgan's like, "You'll do nothing." That's kind of the par for course for a lot of the fight. Now the dialogue in the script is good, but fight dialogue is like, oof.
It's a lot of like, Shaolin masters must fight.
Yeah.
And then we go to modern-day Afghanistan, where MacLeod has posed as a U.S. soldier and is crossing a battlefield in his search for the Kurgan. He calls up Rachel, who tells him about the accounts of a man wielding a jeweled saber, and he takes heads and young girls, which is the Kurgan's MO. So in this script, the Kurgan is a bit of a pedophile and a serial killer.
Yep.
And, these reports have come from a nearby medical aid station. And MacLeod passes a family mourning their dead son, which causes him to flash back to when he came back from the dead, scaring Heather and the rest of the village, who drive him away thinking he's a demon. And so the scripts actually do a fair amount of the like visually like transitioning from flashbacks into the present day and back and forth, which some of them don't do it, some of them do, but most of them do.
It works in this one though. I feel it works a heck of a lot better in this one than the last one.
Yeah. In the last one, in the Wibberleys Draft, I don't even think they really do it. But not long after, MacLeod is about to throw himself over a cliff when he's stopped by Heather, who followed him after he left. She convinces him to keep on living and to let her stay with him, and we then jump ahead 2 years to the port of Stonehaven, where MacLeod is making a living fighting on the waterfront, and Heather is essentially his bookie now. He senses she's replacing a character who was in the previous script, who was just a guy.
Yeah, a lot of this, especially the beginning of this script, feels like it's the Wibberley Draft, but the producers wanted Heather back in it.
Yeah,
So,
which I like more.
Yes, I do too.
And, they're fighting. He senses another immortal approaching and thinking it might be the Kurgan, but it turns out to be Ramirez. And this is basically the same as the Wibberleys Draft, with them tumbling into the water and McLeod going after him and then learning, he can breathe through the water. And then on shore, he explains some of the immortality things to McLeod, and they're met by Heather, who wants to go with Ramirez and learns from him, to which McLeod reluctantly agrees. And Ramirez also tells McLeod about the Kurgan's history here. And he says after he came back to life the first time, his wife had him sealed inside the tomb, where he stayed for 100 years and went mad. And he eventually broke out. He hunted down and killed the remaining members of her bloodline and basically everybody in the village. And I kind of like that backstory.
Yeah, and that's something we will see again. But yes, I do like the idea of the Kurgan being entombed for long periods, and like the bit where he's in Siberia, like that not being the first time that's happened to him, which I can only imagine is wow.
I mean, it does kind of lead to the whole wife thing. Does kind of lead to some silliness where it's like he doesn't believe love exists. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And so we go back to the present day, and McLeod arrives at the medical station where he's met by Dr. Claire Wyatt, who doctor here, they changed her first name, who at first thinks he's been sent with supplies, and then that the army sent him to deal with the man who's been kidnapping girls and beheading anyone who goes after. And McLeod says he isn't with the military. I'm just an antique stealer, and he walks off into the mountains.
Yep.
And we then go to 1547 London, where McLeod, Heather, and Ramirez have ended up. And the two immortals sense a third, and they send Heather away. And McLeod ends up fighting a Viking immortal, and he gains his first quickening, that poor Viking, after beheading him in a churchyard, and because the holy ground rule apparently doesn't exist in this script.
Yeah, it doesn't. And it's weird when it's really noticeable when it's not a thing in this.
And when you read them back to back, it's even more noticeable.
Yeah.
That's one thing about this draft I would definitely change. And Ramirez explains about gaining skills through beheadings. He talks about the gathering and the power that one like the Kurgan mustn't acquire. And he also tells McLeod about how he can't have children and that he must leave Heather to make her happy, blah, 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 the usual stuff. And so later, they're out riding horses on London Bridge when he tells her about how they won't have children, but she still wishes to stick by him. And that's when McLeod senses another immortal who turns out to be the Kurgan, who has recently killed and violated a young girl. And they come to... Yeah, it's really creepy the way they show it. And they come to blows on the bridge, with McLeod nearly losing before Heather tries to ride the Kurgan down on her horse. But he snatches her off it and throws McLeod into the river before talking to Heather, taken aback by her acceptance of McLeod's immortality, like he doesn't believe it. He then decides to teach McLeod a lesson in strength, telling him that love is weakness, and brutally murders Heather with a dagger before throwing her into the river as well.
And it is brutal.
Yeah, and as she's like falling into the river, you get a glimpse of just how mutilated she is.
Yeah, that was really over the top. I actually wrote down in my notes, holy shit, the Kurgan killed Heather.
Yeah, like it is crazy when it happens. And this is intercut with present-day McLeod infiltrating a mountain base and finding the Kurgan saber in the hands of a Pashtun immortal named Tariq, who says he got off a Russian soldier before McLeod beheads him. And so in that present-day sequence, McLeod climbs down the mountain with this young Afghani girl captive that he rescued, which impresses the hell out of Claire. And so how do you feel about the name change there?
I didn't really have an opinion on it when I was reading it. I was like, oh, so Brenda will show back up. Like, okay, this is just like a character that's just here just to kind of like converse with him a little bit, waiting for Brenda to show up. And then the next time Claire shows up, I'm like, oh, okay, I guess we're just not doing Brenda this time.
I like the doctor. I like this version of her a lot.
Yeah, I did too. Cool character I dug.
Yeah. Okay, so we go back to the 1500s where McLeod is burying Heather in the Highlands, and then back to the present day where McLeod arrives home in London as antique shop where he meets with Rachel, and we see he has an entire room dedicated to tracking down the Kurgan. He's got like little string maps and everything, like he's McConaughey from True Detective.
Yeah. But I want to throw in real quick that there is a transition scene here. I think it's here, right? And we see it a couple more times, where we show the building, and we show the building, and then we pan down to reveal that it's modern day, because you see like a horse-drawn buggy go by. Is that here?
Yeah, it starts here, I think.
Yeah, I like that. Like, I thought that was a really cool little transition scene, and I could tell that the people that are in charge liked it too because it's in all the other ones.
Yeah, it's in all the subsequent drafts.
But yeah, I just wanted to shout that out because I like.
Yeah, that was actually really cool. I had forgotten to write that down. And so him and Rachel, they argue over whether the Kurgan is dead already or not and what MacLeod will do when that's finished. And we go back to 1548 London, where MacLeod finds Ramirez in the pub and asks to be trained by him so he can take on the Kurgan. So this does the revenge thing again. It carries it over from the Wibberleys draft, and it carries on into the subsequent drafts, but he has a stronger motivation here.
Yes.
And so Ramirez is reluctant now, but allows it when MacLeod says he'll do anything he asks. And we then come back to the present day where Claire, back working in London again, comes to see MacLeod at his shop and asks him out to lunch. And he refuses, though, despite Rachel going like, I like this girl. Go for it. And she then tells Claire he's not over his deceased wife, but she doesn't say how long it's been for obvious reasons.
Oh, yes.
And it says centuries, or so it feels.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the dialogue was a little rough, a little choppy in this area, I thought.
Yeah, that was a little odd. And then we get a flashback training montage sent across a century and a half, taking place all over the world. In Germany, where we get the Prince's War scene, but it's very much cut back from what it was. Like, we don't get the whole thing there with... We don't get the first quickening there in this version, basically. It's very cut back. Italy, Spain, Japan, Africa, and India, with a quick glimpse of the Kurgan taking a head on the Ivory Coast. MacLeod also takes heads, but he only does so in self-defense. And so, back in the present day, Rachel gets a hit on the saber, saying it was the property of a young Russian soldier named Ivanov, whose grandfather fought in World War II, but the records from the Soviet days are hard to come by. And MacLeod says he'll have to deal with a little weasel currently located in Morocco to get access to them.
You know, and it's like, oh, I guess we're going to bring Skinny back. And then
we go to 1663, to the Battle of Mogersdorf, where MacLeod meets said weasel for the first time, who's a young Middle Eastern immortal named Samir, who sells information and survives by backstabbing, because that's the only way he can actually win a fight. And so, he says the Kurgan is in Africa profiting off the slave trade, so he's evil, but refuses to take MacLeod to him, even stabbing him in the back to get away. And like, Ramirez is like, don't even bother with this kid.
Yeah.
And so in the present day, MacLeod goes to find Samir in Morocco, where he meets his surrogate parents, as well as a number of bodyguards he has to fight before Samir calls them off. And like, Samir's like surrounded by women as well, and he's kind of a bit like Baby Herman, the 30-year-old Lust and the 3-year-old Dinky. And he shows MacLeod his research room, explaining that 11 immortals left standing is the magic number to trigger the gathering. He's calculated this out. And he says that 12 are still around, 13 if the Kurgan is indeed still alive. And so MacLeod asks for Samir to track down Ivanov's World War II service records for him. And so then we go to 1750 in the San Mediata Church in Florence, where Ramirez finally offers MacLeod his head and experiences, which MacLeod refuses to take. They then sense the Kurgan nearby, and Ramirez runs MacLeod through and dumps him in a wagon to keep him from getting himself killed, which I don't quite buy this part, where it's like, oh yeah, the Kurgan doesn't notice he's there if he's in a wagon.
Yeah.
He confronts the Kurgan, and it's here that we learn that Ramirez was one of the villagers that the Kurgan slaughtered when he broke out of his tomb, so Ramirez is not Egyptian in this version.
Nah, that was a little...
Yeah, well, but it does explain how he knows all about him.
Yeah, that's true. And I'll take that over the Kurgan being a pharaoh.
Yes, I will too. And so he teases the Kurgan about his proclivities and being buried alive, and they fight with Ramirez getting decapitated.
As you do.
As he always does, except in that one script.
Nope.
And there is no screaming out his name and making a quickening bounce off the planetary shield to bring him back to life. And then back in the present day, MacLeod arrives back in London, where he gets a call from a hospital and rushes over there. And then Rachel had a dizzy spell and collapsed, and it turns out she specifically requested Claire as her doctor. And then the two of them have some more awkward, cute interactions, which are actually pretty well written. Like, their whole dynamic in this is pretty good. And Rachel is very obviously trying to set them up.
Yeah.
Rachel's really funny in this.
Yeah, it's a cute scene.
And then we go to the 1944 Poland flashback, where Kurgan, who's working with the Nazis again, he's holed up in a hotel, and he's holding several girls hostage, including an 8-year-old Rachel, so this version's a bit different. MacLeod arrives, and they fight, and MacLeod nearly gains the upper hand before the hotel gets bombed and collapses. And Rachel sees McLeod dig himself out of the rubble, and he takes her in then and there as the Soviet army approaches. So basically the same flashback, but a little bit different.
Yeah, and I liked that line of dialogue when McLeod and Kurgan first face off there, where Kurgan looks at McLeod and he's like, "Do you still dream of her? Do you remember her screams?" And I'm like, "Oh, that was good. That was good. That's like a trailer line to me, where I'm like, that's pretty good."
Yeah, and I like the line where he says, "It seems we'll have some entertainment tonight."
Yeah.
And so in the present day, McLeod tells Rachel about how Samir found the information for him. Ivanov had been posted at a gulag in Siberia, which is where the Kurgan must have been imprisoned, and he makes preparations to leave, but Samir has gone there ahead of him with several armed men, hoping to take advantage of the Kurgan's presumably weakened state to take his head, then take McLeod's when he arrives, so definitely a weasel.
Oh, yeah.
And they find the gulag sealed shut from the outside, and the whole place is full of corpses. That damn swastika pin comes back. And they find the Kurgan as well, emaciated but still alive. And the fight breaks out off camera, and an approaching McLeod sees the quickening from a distance, but finds only bodies, a pile of ash, and Samir's saber when he gets there. That's right. In this draft, when they take the head, the bodies collapse into dust.
Yeah. That just hit me too.
And that carries over into the next draft as well.
Yeah, I thought that was a little disappointing that fight happens like off screen. But it's luckily it's rectified in the two next drafts.
Yeah, in very strange fashion. But so McLeod calls up Rachel saying he has a plan, and he donates his entire sword collection to the British Museum, the idea being to make headlines and draw the Kurgan right to him. The event is televised, and a Russian teenager who is Ivanov's grandson sees it and recognizes his grandfather's stolen sword. And he goes to tell his grandmother, but he finds her murdered and the Kurgan standing over her body. He says he would have locked up Ivanov like he was if the man was still alive, and asks the teenager where his sword is. And the next time
Isn't it kind of implied that like the teenager is wearing the Kurgan outfit from the movie?
Yeah, he's wearing the jacket, and the next time you see the Kurgan, he's wearing it, so you get the idea he killed him.
Yeah.
And so we go to the museum event where McLeod is met by Claire, who was invited by Rachel. They talk for a bit, and McLeod flat out tells her about himself, and she takes it as a joke, and she actually says, "Well, if it were me, I would have said I was from an alien race, but, immortal's good too."
Yeah, that was cute.
I was like, oh, you son of a bitch. I would have gotten a huge laugh out of that in the theater if this had actually gotten made. And so, returning home, a conflicted McLeod pitches Claire's card into the trash before finding Rachel sprawled out on the floor. And she's taken to the hospital, where she encourages McLeod to tell Claire about himself for real. And Claire happens to overhear this. She follows McLeod to ask him about this, only for him to be approached and challenged by a, quote, black hipster immortal while he's unarmed.
Yeah.
And so McLeod manages to knock him down with a tire iron and run for it, looking for swords he's had stashed around the city, finding a naval boarding cutlass that he beheads the hipster with. And this triggers the gathering, alerting immortals all over the world. So yeah, black hipster immortal. Didn't think I'd hear that one.
Yeah, that one kind of came out of nowhere.
I'm like, what would that even look like?
Now, it's, so like in the second script, in the Wibberleys Draft, they actually, like, is it Skinny that sends out he sends out like a message to all the immortals, and that's what causes them to go to London? Because in this one, they actually feel compulsion to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, that's one thing I like about these drafts a little bit more than the original movie, because in the original movie, there's this big deal made about how they'll be drawn to a faraway land when only a few of us are left, and the only indication you have that the gathering is going on in the movie is the Kurgan says, "Finally, the gathering." And then there's like a scene later on where Castigar is like, so this is the gathering, huh?
Yeah. Kind of underwhelming.
And it is kind of funny that like 4 people showed up for it.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I do like about pretty much all of these scripts, is that there's more than 4 people.
Yeah, a lot more.
Yeah.
And so McLeod makes his way home, where he finds Claire waiting for him, and he allows her in, and he shows her the album of pictures of Rachel growing up, while he stays the same, and Claire is accepting of McLeod's nature, in awe of everything he must have seen, and she then gets a page, and has to tell McLeod that Rachel has passed away. And so we go to her funeral, and it's intercut with the various immortals arriving in London for the gathering, and I'm just imagining when there's a major character who dies early on in season 2 of the TV show, and they get this huge send-off montage of like all their different scenes from the show set to Dust in the Wind.
Oh no.
And it actually works. And then they do it again later in the series. They flash back to her again and play the song. And it's like, okay, enough. And after the burial, MacLeod tells Claire that he must go and fight. And we see the Immortals arriving in the British Museum and breaking open the weapons cases. And the Kurgan arrives last. And MacLeod takes a saber from the case before he can get to it because MacLeod is just a dick like that. And a massive brawl breaks out with a female Brazilian Immortal moving in on MacLeod. Now, she shows up with a bunch of scripts.
Yes.
And so the fight...
But I get my museum fight again, so I'm happy.
Yeah, you're happy. And so the fight continues with MacLeod and the Brazilian spilling out onto the streets, where Claire arrives, having followed MacLeod, and the Kurgan spots her from the window. And MacLeod and the Brazilian, they end up fighting in the tube station, and they end up on the tracks, and MacLeod takes her head just before the train smashes into him. And then Claire shows up and retrieves him from the tracks and covers for him, taking him to recover from his wounds before he rejoins the fight. And while they were fighting, the Kurgan spotted her from the window. And so while this is going on, the fight in the museum continues, and the Kurgan wielding MacLeod's old claymore and winning hands down. That's something I forgot to mention about that first script, is that in that first script, he always fights with the MacLeod broadsword. He never makes the switch to the katana, which he does in all the other scripts.
And the movie, I believe.
Yeah, in the movie, he switches over to... He leaves the broadsword after Heather dies, and he continues on with Ramirez's sword.
That's right.
Yeah, and so, he's winning hands down, and we go back to the apartment, and he's readying himself to leave when the Kurgan shows up and starts shooting flaming arrows at him, one of which pins him to the wall. And he's forced to send Claire out of the building ahead of him, where she gets caught by the Kurgan. He drags her off, balking at her claims of loving MacLeod for his compassion, because he doesn't know what love is, and he wants her to show him. Pardon the joke.
God.
And killing a passerby who tries to help her. There's a guy walking his dog who tries to intervene, and he just stabs him.
Yeah.
And so he takes her to London Bridge, which London Bridge is no longer in London.
Yeah.
They moved it piece by piece to Arizona. So yeah, that's a bit of a fuck up. And then MacLeod catches up to them, and he's dangling Claire over the water like he did with Heather so long ago. And then the Kurgan gives MacLeod a lecture about how love isn't real and the mortals are meant to rule, etc. And then MacLeod proposes a trade, Kurgan saber for Claire, and throws the sword to him, but he tosses Claire over the side anyways. And MacLeod dives for Claire, and he catches her because she managed to grab onto a cable, and he pulls her up, telling her to run as the Kurgan moves in for an attack. And the Kurgan furiously attacks MacLeod, getting him off balance and slicing Heather's Luckenbooth from around his neck, where he's worn it for all these years. And then MacLeod catches it before it can fall, and the Kurgan smashes his neck, temporarily killing him. Pretty crazy moment.
Oh, yeah.
And then the Kurgan is about to take MacLeod's head when Claire smashes into him with a car, sending him flying. And then MacLeod, meanwhile, has a vision of the afterlife, and he speaks with Heather and Rachel, saying he can't stay, and he wants to see what's next, and he drops the Luckenbooth into the river as he awakes. So the Luckenbooth keeps showing up in all these scripts, but it almost always has a different function. In the very first one, it's how he meets up with Brenda. In the Wibberleys script, it's sort of, a symbol of, of Heather's rejection, and here it's him holding on to the past, and he has to let go, literally.
Yeah.
Which is kind of reminiscent of the ending of Super 8 with the locket. And then the fight with the Kurgan recommences with MacLeod utilizing all of the skills he has learned and beats him down until he takes his head. And then a massive quickening ensues with the faces of all the different immortals forming a tornado of white light that shoots into MacLeod. Now that's a great visual.
Yes. And I like it's when they're fighting, right? And it's like you get like the flashbacks, like while they're fighting, and he's using the stuff, like he's using the training that he's used. Like they actually have like, it's real fluid the way that they do it. That would have been, if they pulled that off, that would have been really cool, I think. Yeah,
that would have been pretty awesome. And so we then go to a Scottish mountainside where MacLeod explains to Claire what he now knows. And I really, really like this take on the prize, is that the Immortals were all parts of a single consciousness that had been shattered long ago, and that they had to be brought together as one, and that there really was no choice about it, and they are now one within him, but even he isn't really sure what that means, and he's also wondering what broke them apart in the first place. And they kiss as a storm appears on the horizon, an omen of things to come, and that's where it ends. I think that is one of the most interesting ways to end this.
Yes, I agree.
Like, it goes full cosmic craziness right at the end, in a good way. Like, I want to know what happens next, I really do.
So your overall impressions of this one were good.
Yeah, I really like this. There's a couple of little things here and there, like the Holy Ground rules and stuff like that, where I'd trim that, maybe trim some of the Kurgan's speechifying about love.
Yeah, and the fighting dialogue. Look, some of the dialogue in this was weird because some of it's really bad, but then some of it's really good. So, but I guess if she worked on this for, I guess, a month, maybe, yeah, that would make sense.
And this is her first draft.
Yes.
So she probably worked on it a little bit more because the next draft is over a year away.
Oh yeah, that's right. I should have been keeping better track of like the actual time spent in between these drafts.
Yes. Now, this draft, it looks like they stuck with it for quite a while. Like they stuck with Rosenberg's ideas for quite a while because it's over a year until you get the next draft. And in that time, in August of 2011, that's when Justin Lin stepped away because he was committed to making the next Fast and the Furious movie, which was actually his last for like 7 years, actually.
Oh, is he doing the new one?
Yeah, he's doing 9. He stepped away for 7, 8, and the spinoff. And I do wonder if that's maybe why he took a break from the series, because he wanted to go do this and then he couldn't.
Yeah.
And then eventually Juan Carlos Fresnadillo signed on to take over from him. And he did 28 Weeks Later, which is his best known thing. And he's been attached to like 3 or 4 different unproduced projects ever since. Like he was one of the guys on for BioShock. He was supposed to do The Crow at one point. Of his films, I have only seen 28 Weeks Later. And even that, I'm like, that movie's okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it holds a candle to the first one, but I like it. It's like it for more than just the helicopter scene.
It's got some good scenes, but it also has some like, well, that moment was kind of dumb in it.
Yeah.
And so he was signed on, and then apparently there were rumors that they were considering Vinnie Jones or Ray Stevenson to play the Kurgan.
Ray Stevenson? The Punisher?
Yeah, the Warzone Punisher. I can see him doing it. Not Vinnie Jones.
No. I wasn't even going to mention that.
Oh, I'm the Kurgan, bitch.
Oh.
And then in June 2012, Ryan Reynolds was confirmed to play Connor McLeod, and nothing against Ryan Reynolds, but that sounds like an SNL sketch.
So is this so is this the first time was like this? I guess this was like the first time they got far enough to actually start considering casting. Because I'd be really curious to know like who they had in mind during the previous drafts.
Like I have not seen anything. That's the thing. I've not seen any actual official word on it.
Yeah, because for years that was all I heard about this was like they're making a Highlander reboot and it's going to have Ryan Reynolds. And yeah, I was never a fan of that idea. I mean, I love Reynolds, but like it's just I don't know. I don't know.
Just try and picture him with the long hair trying to do a Scottish accent.
Yeah, no.
This sounds like something Deadpool would make fun of. And I actually did tweet at him asking if he had anything to say about it, but he never responded. But so, okay, these guys were in place, and then the next script that was written was by Noah Oppenheim, and it's dated, wait a minute, and the current revisions are dated November 8th, 2012. But so that's the date, and Noah Oppenheim, let's look at his writing credits. He has 3. He wrote...
Oh, right, I was reading about this guy.
Yeah, he wrote The Maze Runner, which is supposed to be the good one of those movies.
I liked it.
He wrote Allegiant, the third Divergent movie, the one that bombed so badly they never finished.
Yeah.
And Jackie, the Oscar-nominated movie about Jackie Kennedy.
Huh. It looks more like he was like more on the producer sides of things.
Yeah, he's got more production credits. And a special thanks credit on Now You See Me Too, of all things. So this script, it opens, and we get a new opening this time.
Yeah, and I liked it.
Yeah, I liked it too. And they must have liked it because it continues on to the next draft, basically. It opens on the Pontic-Caspian steppe in 550 BC, where we meet a pre-immortal Kurgan and his family, who are sitting around a fire outside their yurts, which are tents, drinking fermented pine needles, which apparently is actually a thing, when they get attacked by raiders led by a man wearing a wolf skull. And he asks each member of the family to kill the rest, and they all refuse, but the young Kurgan manages it, and then the wolf skull then kills him with a dagger. And Wolf Skull wakes the next morning, finding his band all killed, and a blade swipes at him, killing him. That's actually a pretty good origin story.
I like that a lot. I actually have it in my notes as saying Kurgan origin really cool. Have high hopes for this script.
Yeah, and what I like about it is that if you're watching it in the movie, you wouldn't know which one is him until it happens.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
And so we then go to present-day Karachi, Pakistan, where we meet Connor McLeod, who meets with another mortal named Laszlo in the seedy tavern. And Laszlo says he's got reports of the one McLeod is looking for, having holed up with the Taliban in the mountains and put himself forward as some kind of warlord. And then McLeod thanks him, and Laszlo says his debt is paid, and McLeod checks a piece of paper with locations and dates crossed out and a picture of the Kurgan in the World War I era German uniform. So this has kind of gone back to the Wibberleys Draft a little bit.
Right.
With the Pakistan thing.
Yeah.
And then McLeod runs into a wedding procession in the streets of Karachi, which triggers a flashback to 1547. And so we get preparing for the wedding scene again with Heather, which is basically the same. And his farewell to her is the same. She gives him the looking booth. And so, they head off. They get interrupted by, the word of the English marching on Pinky Kluk. And they march into battle. During the battle, McLeod's father, Ian, takes an arrow to the chest and dies, so the Kurgan isn't involved in that this time. And it's not long after when he senses the Kurgan coming, and he's noticed by him, who's now working for the English as a mercenary, and he's wearing the wolf skull, so we brought back that weird helmet from the original movie.
I was going to say, I saw that callback.
And they fight, their blades unable to touch, because there's a weird force field that pops up. This script adds a lot of weird stuff. And then the Kurgan runs McLeod through with his saber, but taking a nick to the throat from the Scotsman in the process. And he goes in for the beheading, but is driven off by musket fire and a strange cloaked figure. And McLeod, air quotes, dies as he's taken from the field. And then McLeod comes back to life during the funeral procession and is tied to the back of a stallion and driven off despite Heather's objections. And this is where it gets different. She's preparing to follow him when the English arrive in the village led by the Kurgan. He offers the villagers their lives in exchange for McLeod, and Heather tries to shame them into silence. And they tell the Kurgan that they drove him out and promises Heather he'll punish them for it. In a field not far away, McLeod has fallen from the stallion and panics when he sees smoke coming from the village. And he arrives back there to find the village burned and the people, including Heather, slaughtered.
Yep.
Now, it's mentioned that he has the Luckin Booth with him in the battle, and the Kurgan notices it. And then Heather took it off his body before the funeral procession, and he notices it on her. So that's going to come back later.
And we're going to see that line that Kurgan uses again in the last draft. How awkward, both our hearts drawn to the same suitor.
Yeah, which makes it sound like he's in love with McLeod.
Yeah, it's I like the line, but yeah.
And so McLeod buries all of them, and in his grief goes to throw himself off of a cliff, but is stopped and knocked out by the cloaked figure. And then he awakens in a fancy bedroom in a seaside castle and is met by Ramirez, who offers him help, but they fight. And McLeod discovers he's an immortal too. And so Ramirez begins explaining the basics of immortality as they fight, as well as their ability to charge swords with energy, which creates those force field things, which explains earlier what happened. And then Ramirez ends up overcoming McLeod by summoning the ghosts of the immortals he has slain over the years. I feel like they kind of given the immortals extra superpowers just to squeeze in as many special effects as they can.
Yeah, oh boy. I did. Okay, so the blades pushing away from each other, I kind of like that. I wouldn't say it worked particularly well. It's a little confusing, I thought, at first when they first introduced it. Maybe it would have been better to maybe it would have been cool in the movie visually seeing that happen. But the ghosts aspect, no. I had a strong reaction to that, and it was not good.
Does it get worse later for you?
Yes, it gets a lot worse.
Yeah, we'll get to that. And so over dinner, which is where we're told that they're at Ramirez's estate in Galicia, Spain. He apparently must have been knocked out for a really long time if he went from Scotland to Spain before he woke up.
Yeah, actually, I thought about that too. I was like, what, did he just keep punching him? Putting him out, yeah.
And then Ramirez explains about the gathering and how the Kurgan, who fights for conquerors and tyrants, must not achieve it. And that McLeod is the first to have gotten a hit in on the Kurgan in quite some time. And then a training montage follows at the estate, with McLeod learning many different ways of fighting. They then go to war together, fighting in the Prince's War in Saxony, where McLeod fights a Viking immortal, so this scene has come back. taking his head and experiencing his first quickening. Now here it's described as a lightning storm that suddenly brews up and lightning strikes and connects their two bodies.
Yeah.
This sort of carries over into the next draft, but it's a bit different.
But I'm just going to go ahead and throw this out there right now. I think it's way cooler than the next one.
Yeah, it's way more over the top, too.
Yeah, that's true, but I like it.
Yeah, and so they end up getting paid handsomely for helping to win the battle, and they return to the estate. And in the present day, McLeod pays a truck driver to take him into the mountains, and then we go back to the past where McLeod and Ramirez have been fighting in the Franco-Habsburg War. So we get this scene again. They're in the church after the battle when McLeod senses another immortal. It's one of the wounded men nearby who doesn't know what he is yet. And Ramirez encourages McLeod to kill him then and there, but refuses, even when the man suddenly attacks him out of instinctual bloodlust. And it's explained in these scripts that when you first become an immortal, you're overwhelmed by this killing instinct, so that they have to fight in a certain sense, but they can overcome it if they try hard enough.
Right, which I like. That gives a little bit more, I guess it gives a little bit more reasoning to them constantly being at odds.
It gives a little more motivation to why some of them end up so kill crazy.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean.
And, he tells him to go home to his wife and fight no more. And we see that this man is Laszlo and that this is the debt that he owed McLeod, which is what he was helping him earlier. And Ramirez isn't happy about this, telling McLeod that his training was wasted on him. And we see him send off a messenger bird with the note, Ramirez, Galicia, Spain, to an unknown party. And we follow the bird up into the sky, and we go back down, and we're back in the present day again, where McLeod bluffs his way past a Taliban border crossing by letting them shoot him and then playing dead long enough to slash their tires and steal one of their motorcycles, driving off into the mountains, which was pretty cool for a little action scene.
Wait, is this... Yeah, this is the one that has all the motorcycle scenes in it, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. They really, really wanted that motorcycle. They really, really wanted, motorcycles in this movie.
Yeah, and we then go...
I was going to say one last thing. At least it gives, Connor something to do in Pakistan before the fight with the executioner.
Yeah. And so we then go back to the past where it's now 1553, where Ramirez's message has been received by Skinny, who is back in this version, who is a legless immortal monk living in a Sicilian monastery. He's met by the Kurgan, whom he has summoned, and sells the location of Ramirez to him, trying to double his money, but the Kurgan just knocks his chair over. And this is where we find out that Ramirez has deliberately sold himself out. I like the fact that he's just crippled from the beginning here. You don't have the weird thing where he's fine, and then he's in the Civil War, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, it just it cuts the fat.
And so back at the Ramirez estate, McLeod is getting ready to depart when Ramirez stops him and offers his head, wanting McLeod to take his experience to be ready to face the Kurgan. McLeod won't do it, though, and that's when the Kurgan arrives. The fight seems to switch back and forth between McLeod and Ramirez, and it looks like McLeod is about to go out when Ramirez tackles the Kurgan over a cliff and into the sea, a quickening following soon after. And then McLeod vows to take as many heads as he can and then face the Kurgan, and the montage follows of him fighting through multiple wars throughout history, taking heads as he goes, all in pursuit of his enemy. And you can see the shadow of the Kurgan standing on a hill, always at the other end of the battlefield.
And what did you think of this?
This was awesome. This was great.
I'm glad we agree, man.
This was really, really cool. It's like they saw the opening of X-Men Origins Wolverine and said, let's do that in a good movie.
Yeah. And I want to say, not to jump ahead too far, we'll get there when we get there, but there's another really cool montage, if I remember right, towards the end of this one. So, yeah, I like this.
Yeah, there might have been one of those. But yeah, we then go back to the present day with McLeod assaulting a mountain fortress and taking out guards left and right in pursuit of the Kurgan. And he finds 3 journalists, Brenda Wyatt among them, so she's a reporter here, locked in a room, but leaves them there to continue his search. He finds a Pashtun imposter wielding the Kurgan sword, claiming to have taken his head, and he's literally just called Imposter Immortal in this.
Yeah, they cut out all that stuff.
Yep, and then they fight, but it takes place off-screen with Brenda seeing the quickening lightning strike the fortress from her cell, which is cool. And as he leaves, McLeod lets them out, only for Brenda to snap his picture and ask him lots of questions. And he gets in close, and he's pretending to attend to one of her wounds. He just snatches the camera and smashes the memory chip and drives off on the motorcycle. So, Dick McLeod.
Yeah.
And we then go to McLeod's antique store in London with the same, transition where they make you think it's the past. And he meets with Rachel, who isn't happy about him being out of contact with her, but he smooths things over by showing her a rare bracelet he picked up. He also shows her the Kurgan saber, and they debate over whether or not he's still alive. And Rachel says he has to be dead, and she says that she was there, and I have like a million questions about that statement. And we go to 1944 Poland, where we get that flashback where the Kurgan, having joined up with the Nazis, is occupying a hotel. And in this version, he's told a prisoner was caught, and it turns out to be McLeod. The Kurgan orders him shot, and McLeod just pops back up and keeps fighting, eventually getting subdued by a large number of men. And the Kurgan starts to gloat, but that's when the bombing raid happens, and the soldiers all scatter. And McLeod and the Kurgan are fighting, and the Kurgan is about to get the upper hand before the building collapses on him. And then McLeod emerges from the rubble, spots an orphaned baby, and walks off with it, and the baby is Rachel. So, yeah, you were there, but you don't actually remember any of this shit. That line doesn't make any sense. Don't know how they didn't spot that. And so Rachel sends pictures of the saber out to their contacts, hoping to get a new lead. And it turns out that Skinny, still living in the monastery, but with like all this high-tech equipment now, is one of them. And he tracks the sword's ownership back to a POW camp in Siberia. So that element is still in place.
Yep.
All right, so we go to McLeod drinking in a pub he owns, which has been set up as a tribute of sorts to Ramirez. Like there's different items from the estate there, as well as like a full-size portrait of the guy, which was in the castle.
Yeah, and I like that. That's the first time we've seen that. I actually like that. I thought that was cute that he would own a pub.
Yeah, that was nice. And then so he leaves, and he knows there's a hooded figure following him. He confronts the person who turns out to be Brenda. She reveals that she's figured out that there's something fishy going on with him, and is threatening to write an article exposing him if he doesn't cooperate. And so in Siberia, Skinny, now outfitted with carbon fiber prosthetics, which was a nice touch, and his men, they arrive on the site of the POW camp and begin digging into the earth to reach it, so it's buried instead of just sealed up.
Right.
Like they went, we don't like this guy, so we're just going to bury him alive.
Literally a hole in the ground. Right.
Yeah. And then, McLeod starts following Brenda as she leaves her job at the Times, and something of a motorcycle chase ensues, with them speeding out to the country before Brenda skids out and ends up in a field. And McLeod confronts her there and then offers to buy her a drink. So there's those motorcycles again.
There's that motorcycle chase. Well,
yeah, we got a licensing deal with Ducati. We got to put some advertising in here.
Yeah.
And in Siberia, Skinny's team, they have finished digging and they reach the door to the prison. And then we go back to McLeod and Brenda, who are on their date, and they're at this pub that's supposed to be the oldest one in England. And she talks about how going into dangerous places looking for a story is how she lives life, and it's a total rush, so she's something of an adrenaline junkie. And McLeod tries to deflect questions about his life and charm her into letting go of the story, but it doesn't take. And he also has an encounter with a Nordic female immortal named Greta, but she doesn't try to attack or take his head because they apparently have some kind of a history together. Like, it's implied she has a thing for him.
Yeah.
And so we go back to Siberia, where Skinny's team is exploring the prison, and they find a cell that's been sealed shut, and they open it with acetylene torches, finding an emaciated Kurgan inside. He asks for water, to which Skinny pours it on the ground for him to lap up. And Skinny explains that there are 12 immortals left and that the gathering must be close at hand, and that he's going to take the Kurgan's head to gain an advantage. And then the Kurgan seemingly tries to crawl away, but he's really reaching for a string that brings a blade down, decapitating Skinny and granting the Kurgan his quickening. And he then makes short work of the rest of the team. And I'm like, okay, is he now Kevin McAllister?
Yeah. How exactly did he make this? Because he's locked in his cell, right?
Yeah.
So, and we'll get this. Something similar to this happens in the next one, and it's just as ridiculous. But I guess it's a little bit more believable because of like how he pulls it off.
Yeah.
But this was just like, I guess the Nazis the Soviets just left a friggin' scythe in his cell. And
it just happened to be the correct height to take off Skinny's head.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe it could have been like part of a trap that was left there just in case the Kurgan had tried to escape. And in his time there, he had figured out a way to kind of reconfigure it to his own means. But yeah,
yeah, it's a little weird. But okay, so we go back to McLeod's London penthouse where Rachel informs him that there's been a break-in to the store and his vault, and he recognizes the man as a photographer who works with Brenda. And I'm like, isn't this highly illegal to just break into someone's place and start taking pictures?
A little bit.
And we then go to Brenda being shown the pictures, which show a whole host of historically significant artifacts. And then we go back to McLeod, who tells Rachel that he'll take care of it, as she's worried that the pictures getting published will attract immortals from all over. And also, I'm pretty sure that Brenda is overselling her story. I don't think that many people are going to be that interested in this guy.
Yeah. Yeah, it just goes back to what we were saying earlier. She's such an antagonistic bitch in this one.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
And in the Moscow hotel room, the Kurgan shaves his beard and head, so we get that image of him from the original movie again, and then heads to a nightclub, killing his way through bouncers and guards until he reaches the back room and confronts an old man who was once a guard at the prison as the one who took his sword. And we then go back to McLeod in London, who takes the Kurgan saber to Brenda and shows her his fake grave, telling her his story as if it was about an ancestor. And I like this idea that he has that he tries to pose himself as the descendant of the original Connor McLeod. I think that's an interesting way to take it.
Yes.
Which is something that kind of comes up a little bit in the TV show where Duncan McLeod pretends to be his own grandson in one episode. And he then drops her off at her office before deciding to follow her, getting caught in a surprise party at her apartment. And this whole sequence is awkward. Where it's like he walks in, he's like, surprise!
Yeah, and at first I liked it. I thought that was like, oh, hey, that's kind of cute. But yeah, awkward is the right word.
And her editor is here, and this is where we first get told that she's actually an American who's working at the London paper for whatever reason. But, McLeod stays behind after the party and helps wash the dishes. He cuts himself on a broken glass. And to distract Brenda from noticing his healing abilities, he kisses her, and it leads to them spending the night together. And the next morning, McLeod finds the dossier she's put together on him, including pictures and a thumb drive. And he also finds pictures of Brenda with another man, which prompts him to steal all the research, and she's not happy about this when she wakes up. I'm like, oh god, what is this CW-level relationship drama that we're going into now?
Oh yeah, no, I hated this. That was when I was like, no, I don't want to go down this route. I don't want this. Because as soon as he saw the photograph, I was like, I know exactly where this is going. You know what I mean? It was just, I've seen this a million times. I know what's happening. I don't want to do this again.
Yeah, and so it then intercuts between McLeod and Rachel going over the file, and Brenda, who gets party pictures in an email finding one of McLeod, and then Rachel spots an article in the file reporting on the death of a Russian black market dealer who specialized in old weapons, and McLeod immediately knows it's the Kurgan who did it, and hatches a plan, and that was the guy from the nightclub. So apparently, Brenda's been collecting info very quickly.
Yeah.
And so he has Rachel donate his weapon collection to the British Museum without his name being involved, which gets the Kurgan's attention. And then meanwhile, Brenda puts the party picture of McLeod into a work database and looks for a match, finding one of McLeod in a Vietnam War platoon under the name Nash. So he isn't just constantly changing his name to Connor McLeod over the years. He has used the Russell Nash name from the original movie in this version.
Yeah.
The idea that he will occasionally circle back to the Connor McLeod name, I think, is a pretty decent one.
Yeah.
And so she takes the photo to the museum and confronts McLeod, and they argue, with McLeod following her out of the building as she leaves, and she actually says, I'll send this picture out, and it will be in every news venue in the world will take it. And I'm like, I really don't think anybody will care. This is going to be like one of those BuzzFeed articles about the Civil War soldier who kind of sort of looks like Nicolas Cage.
Right.
And so she follows her out of the building as she leaves, and he asks her about the man in the pictures, who turns out to be Brenda's deceased husband, which is makes him feel like a jackass, which he is.
And there it is. It's okay, moving on.
Yeah, it's not great. And so while this is going on, the Kurgan admires his sword in the display case and asks Rachel, not knowing her connection to the McLeod who found it. She realizes who he is and tells him it came from an anonymous donor. So she, gets out of this okay. Back outside, McLeod tells Brenda everything, that he was the man from his story. She's not sure to believe him, and she's equally put off by the idea of spending his immortality pursuing a vendetta. And I'm like, wow, you're getting awfully judgmental, Miss Stalker and Breaker and Enterer.
Yeah.
And McLeod is about to apologize to her when he senses an immortal approaching. He grabs her arm and they run for it as McLeod is unarmed at the moment. He runs for a sewer grating where he stashed a sword years before, telling Brenda to run. And he retrieves the sword as the immortal approaches, revealing it to be Laszlo. And they fight, with McLeod reluctant to take his head, but he eventually does so. And a different quickening from the ones we've seen before takes place, signaling the beginning of the gathering. Like, it's a much more intense.
Yeah, which is kind of cool.
And this is where it gets silly.
Yeah.
Mortals from all over the world, they feel this happen, and then their swords begin to glow and vibrate, and they, like, float in the air and point in the direction they have to go.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, this was the other montage. And yeah, no, you're right. It's not
as good as the other one.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just remembered that there was like another montage in here. And yeah, no, it's not.
And the same thing happens to the Kurgan saber, and he finally breaks the glass and takes it as the guests flee. And we go to McLeod, who is drinking in his pub when the Kurgan shows up, commenting that they're on holy ground, the site of an ancient druid cemetery. And he tells McLeod that the prize is the ability to grant life and that he wants to use it to wipe out humanity, because he talks about how being locked up in that cell for so many years, he finally learned to appreciate the quiet, and he hates all the noise that all the mortals make, and so he wants the world to be quiet.
God.
I mean, it's an interesting idea, but the whole thing about, like, oh, it's the ability to grant life, and I'm like, how is that going to give you the ability to get rid of all the humans?
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you want to wait until we get to the end, or do you want to go ahead and talk about that now?
I want to wait till we get to the ending, but I want to say now, how does he know this?
Yeah, because he read the script too.
And then McLeod notices that the Kurgan has the Luckin Booth pinned to his outfit, and he says, he goads him about the fact that he raped Heather, which makes McLeod attack, but because they're on holy ground, he gets blocked by a field of energy.
Yeah, which I guess the whole him raping Heather, is this the first time this has happened in these scripts?
Yes, because she gets burned by him in the original draft. She never even meets him in the Wibberleys, and in the previous one, she just gets stabbed and thrown off the bridge.
Fucking massacred in the last one.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I just wasn't a fan of doing the rape again.
Yeah,
Yeah, it didn't really work for me in the original either, and it definitely doesn't work for me here. But
And then the Kurgan leaves, saying they'll meet again soon. And then back at his penthouse, McLeod's katana is glowing and floating in the air, pointing in a specific direction. And he prepares for the gathering, ready to kill the Kurgan once and for all. And Rachel tries to convince him he has something left in him apart from anger, but he says that's no longer true and says goodbye to her for the last time. And then the Immortals all gather in All Hallows by the Tower Church, the oldest in London. And I looked this up. It was considered to be the oldest in London at one point, but they don't think that's true anymore.
Oh, okay.
And they wait for everyone to arrive. But, it's a nice thought.
Yeah,
and McLeod arrives later than the rest, and the Kurgan arrives last, because he knows how to make a fashionably late entrance. So we briefly go back to the antique store where Brenda arrives and asks Rachel about where McLeod is. And then back at the church, a cloaked man enters and heads for the altar, chanting in a language described as similar to Aramaic, only older. And then the church fills with fog, and your favorite thing comes back, because it forms into the ghosts of the immortals that the ones left have killed, all sitting next to their killers in the pews, with Ramirez right next to the Kurgan. And then the man then speaks in English, revealing himself to be the ghost of the first immortal, and he throws his hood back, and it says he's a bearded man of Turkic origin. And he says that this all began with him before mortals even learned how to count their years. And he says, you all came here by many paths, but only one path truly leads to the prize. And he then tells the spirit that protects the holy ground to leave, deconsecrating the church, and vanishes into thin air as the battle begins. So what do you think of this first immortal guy?
Well, okay, all right. So the idea of them like sitting in the church and all of the spirit, if they hadn't done the thing earlier, like if this was like a one-off thing that shows that, I kind of like that. Like, I kind of like the idea of, like, all the ghosts kind of separating from the bodies and, like, sitting next to them. And that kind of shows, like, especially, like, I should have taken a look to see how big this church... I assume this is, like, a big friggin' church. Like, one of the big boy churches.
It didn't look that big in the picture I saw, but...
Oh, that's a shame. Because I'm like, that could have been really cool if it was just, like, filled ghosts. So it's like you really get an idea of, like, how many have killed and how many have been around. Like, I like that. Like, I like it on paper. Right, or I guess I like it in theory.
It's a good idea. It's a good idea for the gathering, just not for that random scene earlier on.
No, it was awful earlier. But the ghost of the first immortal, No, no, I didn't like it. Like again, I mean, but like way less so. Like I think it's kind of a cool idea to like possibly somewhere in one of these drafts or somewhere in one of these stories, like to introduce like who was the first immortal. Like it's a good question. No, don't do it like this.
I mean, he seems like he's just setting up for a sequel, which, as we find out, he is, but we don't get enough information about him. I mean, the idea that it started with one guy so long ago that mortals were barely even conscious of themselves is an interesting idea.
Yeah, but we're not going to find out about that.
No. And also there's a moment where Connor is looking over at the Ramirez ghost, and the Ramirez ghost is very obviously not happy about its position, which I think is supposed to be tragic, but I found it kind of funny.
Funny, yeah. Just see him there, like with his arms crossed, being like pouty about it.
It's like, oh, McLeod, this is like having to be in Zardoz again. And McLeod tries to go after the Kurgan immediately, but gets pulled into a fight by Greta. And the Kurgan takes the first head of the night, which reveals that the quickenings taken now are supercharged and dramatically increase the receiving immortal strength, because he takes the quickening and then he hits someone and they go flying all the way across the room. And this is where the script just gets silly.
Break out the wire work.
Yeah, we're now Matrix now.
Yeah.
And McLeod sees this and goes, okay, I'm not going to win by being the nice guy here. So he just starts taking heads left and right. And so it's basically just a big fight of them just chopping heads off until they're the only two left. And then the Kurgan, hits him, and McLeod goes flying out into the street, gets hit by a car, and his sword goes flying. And the Kurgan's coming after him, and so he grabs onto a passing BMW and hitches a ride by grabbing onto the bumper and grabs the sword, but then it turns off in the direction. He goes flying and lands on a bridge, causing a pileup.
Oh, God. Yeah, no, this was... yeah, the whole bit with him hanging on to the back of the car, a lot of times when I read these things, I try to see, I try to imagine, with my mind's eye, how it would look in a movie. And I'm just I can't see this working. I can't see this working, with a straight face. It's overly, I couldn't see, I can almost hear the slide whistle, right?
Yeah, like in Man with the Golden Gun.
Jurassic Park, where Dennis Nedry slipped.
Oh, yeah. And so the fight continues on the bridge, but it gets interrupted by cops who fill both of them with bullets, only for the Kurgan to pop back up and fight them off. And then McLeod and the Kurgan cross swords, and the impact is so strong it sends McLeod flying off the bridge and into a city square. And McLeod, beaten and bloody, just lies there as the Kurgan approaches, which is when Brenda arrives on her motorcycle. There it is again, having followed the police helicopters. And she runs to McLeod's side, trying to convince him to give up the fight and leave, but then the Kurgan mortally wounds her with a throwing knife. And this galvanizes McLeod, who remembers that the prize is the power over life, so he's going to heal the woman he loves, even though she's been a total bitch the whole script.
Close here loves.
Yeah, he fights the Kurgan with renewed vigor for something other than revenge. And they both knock each other around, but the Kurgan knocks him through a cafe window, and it appears he has the upper hand. However, McLeod gets in the same lucky shot he did when they first met, decapitating the Kurgan, who as he dies says, "It's finally quiet," which is kind of a nice moment.
Yeah. It was okay.
Yeah, it was okay. He goes to dying Brenda and then braces her as the final quickening occurs, which does the trick and heals her wounds. And they leave together just as the cops begin to arrive. And then we go to the final scene where McLeod and Brenda decide to move into the Ramirez estate. And I should talk about the prize being the gift of life. It's kind of like, that's it?
Yeah, I mean, it's can he only use it the one time, I guess?
That's what makes me wonder about. Can he only use it the one time? Can he only use it with... Because having him, embrace her into the quickening just makes you wonder, was that the prize? Or was it just the effect of being next to a quickening? It's very confusing. But so they move into the Ramirez estate, which McLeod owns. And Brenda runs in ahead of him looking for the bedroom, as she says.
Wow.
And he briefly feels the sensation of another immortal nearby, but it fades and McLeod brushes it off, thinking he's just being paranoid. And he passes a mirror while following after her, and which after he's passed shimmers, and the first immortal appears in it, and it's basically implying that he's listening to them fucking, and he smiles as it ends.
Oh my god. Yeah.
So that's the sequel hook. I'd be curious to know where this version would go. Because what does his presence actually imply?
Yeah, like that, like we mentioned earlier, the story of the first Immortal would be kind of cool. I mean, I feel like the sequel would be a more interesting story, but that was to me, I don't know if this is definitely the worst ending. I feel like it just kind of squeaks out the skinny ending, the Wibberleys Draft. like I said, I had a really like a gut punch reaction to that. But this was like, oh god, like that's so cheesy and not good cheesy. I'm someone that loves Highlander, and so I love cheese. I love pizza, man. But like this was like, ooh, I don't know. That was not good.
Yeah, and I just wonder what the implication is, what the smile means, because he had that line about how you came here by many paths, but only one of those paths truly leads you to the prize. So does he not actually have the prize yet? Is what I'm wondering. Maybe being the asshole immortal was the way to get the prize.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. That could have been an implication there for the sequel.
Yeah, but it's not. There's not enough information to go on, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's a really lame prize. Like I wasn't a fan of this one.
You get to bring the bitch back to life. Joy.
Joy.
All right,
Meanwhile, Heather just stays up in heaven. I guess she's oh well.
Yeah, that was definitely a step down from the Rosenberg script, especially comparing the interpretation of the prize, because that was just mind bending in her version.
That was really cool.
And this is just like, eh.
Yeah. This draft kind of like overall, this one really kind of took its toll on me a little bit. Like I'm reading it, and it's like fatigue is starting to set in a little bit, and it's not. It's I would say overall, this is the worst one. Yeah. This was an uphill battle for me. So moving on and up.
Yeah, moving on. So just a mere month after this draft was turned in December of 2012, Juan Carlos Fresnadillo walked away from the project due to creative differences. So no one really so we don't know what exactly that means, but I'm wondering if this draft and some of the stuff in it, he just went, no, I don't want to do this.
He probably like, I mean, Highlander, it's awesome. Okay, I'll do it. And then like, let's see what you guys got. And then they pass him this, and he's like, fuck that, I'm out.
And then later on in June 2013, that's when Reynolds dropped out. So it was interesting. He stuck around a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And what's another thing that's interesting to point out is that summer in June of 2013, it was announced that one of the main writers for the TV show, David Abramowitz, was supposed to polish the film's script. And I don't know if that ever actually happened or not. Because, I mean, his name doesn't turn up in any of the previous draft spots.
Yeah, this wouldn't have helped. And I'm glad that he didn't do it.
Yeah, I don't think he would have been the right guy for it. Nothing against him, because he can be a great actor, but I don't think he fits this.
No, and he definitely doesn't fit the way that this was written.
No.
And I mean, I've seen him do, like, we've all seen him do, like, serious roles.
So yeah, he left, and in October 2013... Cedric Nicholas Troyan was hired to direct. Now, he was mainly, at this time, he had only done special effects. And this was supposed to be his directing debut, which ended up being a different movie, but we'll talk about that after he leaves. So he signed on, and then over the course of 2014 is around the time when Alex C. was hired to write his draft, because I know he does a draft slightly earlier than this one, and that this is a revision of it. So this one is dated December 12th, 2014. And I know he did a draft from earlier in the year, but I just don't have it. But I'm guessing it's not too terribly different from this.
Probably not. And I'm glad we have the later draft. That's probably the one he was more comfortable with.
Yes, and to go back to the IMDb game for the last time, as far as his produced credits go, he doesn't have much. He wrote the Watchmen movie, which I really like.
I really like that movie too. I love that movie.
He wrote the Superfly remake, which I've heard was awful.
I saw that. I don't know I don't know anything about that one.
He was the showrunner, I guess, for Wu-Tang and American Saga.
Yeah.
And he was apparently one of the writers attached to write the Crow remake, but he's credited as earlier screenplay.
Yeah, and he has, I want to say, I've seen his name in my script list a couple of times, so I think he has some other stuff that just hasn't been made.
Okay, so that brings us up to this draft. Now, this one has a number of similarities to the previous ones, and for example, it keeps basically the same opening, with Wolf Skull forcing a younger Kurgan, who in this version is given the name Hashur-ul-Uruk.
Yeah, he finally gets the name.
Yeah, okay, fine. And he forces him to slaughter his family before killing him. And this one, he's motivated by the fact that the Kurgans, they recently raided his camp and stole some horses, and then they ate them. And he talks a lot more, he philosophizes a lot more, which makes it a better scene because you're getting an idea of where the Kurgan kind of gets his philosophy from.
And I'm just gonna go ahead and say right off the bat, I mean, I'm sure we're gonna find stuff, but overall, this was a very well written script, and the dialogue's really good.
No, this one is really, really good. Like, it took stuff from the other drafts and just kind of refined it.
Yeah, and after the slog that was the last one for me, this was a very welcome change of pace. So yeah, let's get into this.
Yeah, and so he wakes up, finds that his band has been slaughtered, and this time we actually see the Kurgan before he strikes, and it says that in some imperceptible fashion he has changed from his experience. And we also are given this thing where when he's sitting with his family at the beginning, we get the sense that he's a little bit of an outsider already, so that kind of sets up that he's maybe a little bit of a sociopath to begin with.
Yeah.
And it then moves to the modern day in Haishi, China. So we've moved from Pakistan and Afghanistan to China this time, where McLeod meets with, instead of Laszlo, he meets with Iman Fasil from the original movie. That's the guy he kills in the parking garage at the beginning.
Right.
In a cafe, seeking the Kurgan's location. And Fasil is only helping because taking down the Kurgan will help everyone else. And there's also talk of a gathering being near at hand with immortals already feeling the pull. And they should be meeting in London before long. So there is no tipping point in this script where a head is taken and then the gathering is happening. It's already underway.
Yeah.
So that's already a significant difference. And then McLeod leaves, checking off his list of locations as well as a picture of the Kurgan in an SS uniform. And he then runs into a young-looking immortal named Abdul, who says he was hunting Fasil, but decides to fight McLeod instead, and McLeod tries to dissuade him, but they fight. And McLeod wins, triggering a quickening, which is again brought on by a lightning storm, but we don't see it in full yet.
So I don't want to, so let's not talk about the actual quickening just yet.
Because it's actually a slow reveal over the entire script.
Yeah.
And so we go back to 1547, and this is pretty much the same as the previous draft. He's getting married to Heather, his bride-to-be, when the clan gets word of the English marching on Pink Luke. He bids farewell to Heather.
And it's a little bit, I just want to say, because I've got some notes on this, because I was thoroughly enjoying this one. But yeah, no, I mean, the dialogue here, once again, it's the banter is really cute. I'm glad that they kind of beefed that up a little bit between McLeod and
his family.
Yeah, family. Them tell them to run while you still can, and that I tried, believe you me. I was liking that. I was into this.
It's I don't want to be picturing your wrinkly ass.
Yeah. I think that's earlier we talked about the 3 lines in all of these scripts that are always the same. That's definitely one of them.
And so we get the whole thing of them almost exchanging the Luckin booth again. And we go to the battle where McLeod's father, Ian, is killed. And then, he senses an immortal coming, which is the Kurgan, who's working as a mercenary for the English. And he moves in on McLeod, dominating him in combat despite a lucky shot the Highlander gets in on his throat. And then the Kurgan goes to take McLeod's head, but is driven off by rifle fire this time, and McLeod is taken off the battlefield. Later, McLeod awakes during his funeral procession and is driven off by the villagers while tied to the back of a stallion. And he falls off the stallion and runs into the night. So this is a little bit different from the Oppenheim draft, where he fell off the stallion and laid 3 miles away from the village, and the Kurgan just never spotted him.
And also, in this one, Angus stands up for McLeod there at the end?
I think one of them stands up for him and says, here, we're not going to kill him, we're going to exile.
Yeah, but does that happen in any of the because that happens in the movie, too.
Yeah, I think it might have happened in the Oppenheim draft, I'm not sure. Yeah, and it may have happened in the very, very first one as well. And the next day, the Kurgan has arrived at the village already burning and is asking after McLeod's location. And he takes note of Heather as she defends him, and then takes note of her Luckin booth, and we get that line again, which he saw McLeod wearing it in battle. And this is intercut with McLeod noticing the smoke from the village and hurrying back, only to arrive days too late and find everyone dead, including Heather.
Which is, oh man, that's a gut punch.
And we then go to present-day Philadelphia, born and raised on the playground where I spent most of my days, where journalist Brenda Wyatt said to look similar to Heather, which I could do without the resemblance.
Oh, I was okay with it. I'm neither here nor there.
It's let's save money by giving the same actress 2 roles.
Oh no, you don't think? Nah.
It possible. I don't know how literally they would take it. So she's talking to one of her sources who is, I believe, a question mark after this, undercover detective in a diner, because he's described as looking really scruffy, but they never actually say that he's undercover. And he tells her about a specific murder case where the body was found shot and then beheaded, and she's initially cross over the police not investigating further, but the detective says that their workload is too large to focus on just one case. And then he departs, leaving her with some crime scene photos, and she looks at one, spotting a sword in the corner of the picture. So she gets a little bit more, honestly, the first act present day stuff is almost all her.
Yeah, really good. Like, there's like, I mean, it's, this is Highlander. This is an action movie. This is like fun action romp. This is not like a detective story. But I feel like the detective aspect of this, because they kind of had that a little bit like before, where she was, doing the reporting and stuff. But this felt really strong. I was like, all right, I could see like, yeah, I could see really getting into this, like watching it in the theater.
And we go back to 1547, where MacLeod has just finished burying his dead clansmen, and he senses an immortal approaching, but it's not the Kurgan, but rather Ramirez, who says he hasn't come to fight, and has to deal with MacLeod going through his first killing instincts. And Ramirez realizes MacLeod has only just died his first death, and he thinks the story of him wounding the Kurgan was all bullshit, and begins to ignore MacLeod, and this is really funny, he focuses on digging up this root that he wants to eat, and he goes like, ooh, so lucky to have found it. Like, Ramirez is just a total weirdo in this draft, which I like.
He's jackass, yeah. He just straight up ignores him.
And MacLeod keeps pestering him for information, and Ramirez eventually just runs him through with his own sword and leaves him there.
Yeah.
And MacLeod awakes not long after and tracks down Ramirez to his camp. He complains of MacLeod's stench, but helps him to control the reaction to another immortal, and he explains the basics of immortality to him. And here's where we get the reference to ancient Egypt here. He looks up at the full moon, and he talks about how when he was a boy, they said that the moon was the god Khonsu, the son of Amun, but now they think it's a rock. He's saying, like, maybe what will they say next? That's made of cheese? And I'm like, excuse me, Wallace and Gromit proved the moon was made of cheese. But no, that was a really cool way to sort of bring that side of the character into it.
Yeah, and they didn't overdo it either. Like, they didn't do the fucking pharaoh and slave thing again. It's just cute. It's like, okay, all right.
And then MacLeod wants Ramirez to take him to the Kurgan, and he reluctantly agrees, only for MacLeod to wake up the next morning with Ramirez nowhere in sight, which was hilarious. And so MacLeod pursues him to Plymouth, England. It's mentioned they stop to bathe along the way, but just misses Ramirez as he leaves on a boat and is waving at him as it pulls out.
Yeah.
He then follows him to a vineyard in Bordeaux, where Ramirez is getting hit on by both men and women, and then to a brothel in Bayonne, where Ramirez leaves him tied up with bondage shackles.
Yeah.
And then Ramirez finally gives in on a mountain pass in the Pyrenees, saying he'll take MacLeod to the Kurgan when he thinks he's ready for it.
I just want to throw this there. I love this. And him constantly going after him.
It's really funny. He's just like, oh, come on.
Yeah. It's so different from the first movie and from everything else we've really seen up to this point. And yeah, it's cool. It's a really great little twist on that.
And it fixes the problem of MacLeod just transported to Spain overnight.
Yeah, true.
And so here's where we get a scene where we have the Battle of Renty, where it's the Holy Roman Empire versus the French. And so it's the same thing as that Prince's War scene, only it's taking place in a different part of history. And he chooses to fight for the French despite Ramirez insisting it doesn't make a difference. And then during the fight, a Norse immortal attacks MacLeod, who takes his head and receives his first quickening. And here's where we get a little bit more of it. The storm clouds quickly roll in, forming a hurricane supercell, and the impact is so huge it leaves a crater.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah, it was really cool. Although, even this is just the standard quickening. This isn't like close to the gathering or anything, so it's insane. And the two immortals, they get paid handsomely for their efforts in the battle, as they always do. That's a thing in all these scripts where it's like the immortals, they make their living as mercenaries. And so we go back to the present day with Brenda presenting her research into the beheading to her editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer, including some documents in Russian. And she's figured out that the dead man had no records prior to the Gulf War, and among his belongings is a picture of people at like this charity event, including someone that we, but not her at this point, recognize as MacLeod. And there have also been several beheadings with swords over the past few years, meaning this is a global phenomenon. But the editor doesn't want to spare any travel funds, so when Brenda notices that the building in the crime scene photos is warped and recognizes the same damage in a picture of the area where MacLeod beheaded Abdul in China, she makes the connection and arranges the flight. And I'm just thinking, wow, this news traveled fast.
Yeah.
But this is where we get the idea that, like, if you're in a building, like, the quickening, like, will, like, twist the building in a certain fashion.
Yeah, it will blow out the ceiling and like melt the rafters and stuff. That's what I got out of that.
And we go back to 1556, where MacLeod and Ramirez are traveling through Galicia, Spain, and there's a brief conversation about how Ramirez was born a slave during the reign of Pharaoh Shoshenq II, before MacLeod starts asking again about when he'll be ready to fight the Kurgan. Ramirez says he isn't ready and challenges him to a fight beside some nearby ruins. And Ramirez easily evades MacLeod, running for a stone circle where the Scotsman tries to attack him again, only to be paralyzed on the spot thanks to it being holy ground. So yet another take on holy ground.
It's more than just a church this time.
Yeah, it's a stone circle where that actually comes up in the anime movie where there's a stone circle.
Okay, so it's them kind of playing around with it a little bit.
And then MacLeod and Ramirez arrive at the Ramirez estate in Galicia, where they spend the course of the next year training. And it's a really cool montage, the way it's described as they're fighting and the seasons are changing around them.
Yeah, that was really well written.
And so MacLeod is getting good at sword fighting, and so they go to celebrate at a brothel where MacLeod's like expressing his disapproval, but he ends up sleeping with a prostitute anyways. And he has a dream about Heather, and then he awakes to find Ramirez fighting a Spanish nobleman with a broomstick, all because apparently the guy was abusing the prostitutes and Ramirez peed on him. And he gets run through several times before faking his death in a really hammy manner.
And that's kind of like a callback to the which I was shocked that this is the first time this has come up, because that's one of my favorite scenes from the movie. Like, it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie is the bit where Connor is fucking with the French guy. They're having a duel. And I think this is really kind of the closest that we get to that.
Yeah, this really does feel like it is based on that. The drunken Ramirez, who refused to unsheath his katana for the fight, talks about how he had 3 wives, and he talks about his last wife, Shikiko. Her father made the sword for him, and he only uses it to take heads, saying they would be a dishonor to use it for anything else. And I really like this because we're getting more character development for Ramirez.
Yeah, and you feel like it kind of builds up the idea that when he finally unsheaths that katana, shit's going to go down.
Yeah, and he also finally explains about the gathering and the prize, saying that like he doesn't know what it is, it's a matter of faith, before passing out drunk. And that's interesting because it actually addresses the fact that they don't actually know anything about it.
Right.
And so we go back to the present day where MacLeod runs into Brenda at a gas station in China, and she asks for directions to Hai Shi, and MacLeod, stunned by her resemblance to Heather, points her in the right direction. And he's tempted to stay longer, but instead departs on his bike for the mountains, so there's the motorcycle again.
Yeah.
And she checks her file again before leaving because she recognizes him, and she sees his face from that picture from the 70s, and she recognizes MacLeod as one of the people in it. And from there we go to Bohemia in 1608, where MacLeod and Ramirez are resting after fighting a battle in the 30 Years' War. There's a priest watching MacLeod here with a V tattooed on his wrist. That's going to be important later. MacLeod senses an immortal, and it turns out to be a wounded man named Anton Laszlo, who is experiencing his first proximity to other immortals. He gets overcome by the urge to fight, but MacLeod gets him to calm down and sends him back to his family. Ramirez, not approving of this, writes his name and location on a piece of parchment and hands it to a messenger to take to a monastery in Sicily. So this is kind of the same as the previous draft, only a little bit different. Instead of a bird, it's an actual person. And Ramirez tells MacLeod it's time to return home, and we see them a month later on the road, where MacLeod stops to play with some children, much to Ramirez's annoyance, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, it's cute, though.
Yeah, and we then go to the monastery in Sicily, where the message is handed to a female Chinese immortal named Wang Sun, who has been keeping track of the immortal's location, and she wields what's called a sword pistol, where it's a sword, but embedded in the handle as a gun, which is a really cool idea.
Yeah.
And I think it is a real thing.
I believe it is.
And then the Kurgan arrives, having been summoned by Sun, so she's basically this draft's version of Skinny, who she gives him the parchment, and Ramirez once again is giving himself up in exchange for agreeing to spare her until the gathering. And the Kurgan can't do anything on holy ground, so he agrees. And from there, we go back to the present day, where MacLeod begins his assault on the mountain compound he was heading for, taking down a guard before he could raise an alarm. We're getting very Metal Gear Solid here.
Yeah.
And this kind of goes back to the present day story being a little bit slower to get going, but it's not as much of a problem here.
No, it's not a slog.
And so from there, we go back to 1608 to the Ramirez estate, where MacLeod is reading in the banquet hall when Ramirez enters drawing his sword, so you know something's about to go down and attacking him. And Ramirez seems intent on taking his head, but misses on purpose and admits that he wants MacLeod to take his head so he'll be ready to face the Kurgan. They debate this for a bit, and MacLeod senses the Kurgan approaching. He hesitates, and decides to take his mentor's head, only to be interrupted by the Kurgan bursting into the room. So in this one, he actually is going to take Ramirez's head.
Yeah.
That's something of a point of debate in the others, where it's like, he isn't, but he is, but he isn't. And here it's like, it's for sure he is going to do it. And I always thought that was an interesting idea, because the original movie never really addresses, what would happen if it came down to just the two of them. It gets brought up very briefly, but never goes anywhere.
But through these drafts, that is like one of the reoccurring kind of things that has popped up that I do like, is like Ramirez like offering himself up to McLeod, and the reasoning behind it is really cool too, and it makes sense, where it's like Ramirez talks about how he's he's in an old man, he had the misfortune of dying as an old man, or becoming an immortal as an older man, and he just doesn't have like the muscle density really, take on the Kurgan, and he needs someone like McLeod to do it. And by watching McLeod, he realizes that he is like a good person. Yeah, I totally agree. That's good. That's solid, and I'm glad it stuck through the script.
It's similar to what Endgame tries to do with Connor and Duncan, but it just works a lot better.
Yeah.
Because you actually buy the Kurgan as the threat that he's supposed to be, whereas Jacob Kell is just kind of silly.
I've seen pictures of him, and it's not good.
Yeah, and the Kurgan shoots McLeod with a crossbow bolt, knocking him down so he can focus on Ramirez. And I think it's interesting that he's not so obsessed with McLeod in this version. They fight, with Ramirez crashing into the Kurgan and shoving him out the window, the fight continuing along the seaside cliffs, all while McLeod tries to remove the bolt from his chest. Ramirez even causes a kinetic displacement, making his motions blur, but the Kurgan still gets the better of him.
Bit of the superhero stuff.
But it's very much downplayed by comparison.
Yeah. And it's like, all right. It could have been, I mean, does he actually say it?
No, it's in the script. It's in the descriptions.
That wouldn't have bothered me. That could have just been him being cool.
Using his power. And then McLeod intervenes, getting another nick in on the Kurgan's throat, but gets distracted by the Kurgan still having Heather's looking booth. And of course, the Kurgan taunting him about the whole rape thing.
Well.
And then Ramirez steps between them, losing his sword arm and then his head, but not before telling McLeod that he has to let go to defeat his enemy. And then the Kurgan, knowing that the quickening is coming in and that he'll be left vulnerable, he steps off the cliff and falls into the ocean to get away, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And so then McLeod swears to take 1,000 heads and defeat the Kurgan, and we go into a similar montage of the battle throughout the years. And it's fighting various battles across 400 years, and we see him sparing another new immortal, a Zulu warrior named Castigir, and then they fight together up through World War I. So that's a new element that they're bringing in, yet another supporting character from the original movie.
Yeah, I like it a lot.
And so we go back to present-day China, and McLeod has finally reached the top of the mountain, where he's met by Laszlo, who now carries the Kurgan's sword, claiming to have beheaded him. They are about to fight when it cuts to Brenda investigating the destroyed building and asking a kid if he's seen McLeod, going off the old picture, and he takes several sticks of gum and hundreds of yuan.
Yeah.
Like, she tries to bribe him with gum, and then she realizes she's going to have to pay him. And we don't actually see the fight.
No, we don't.
Which is a bit
I mean, yeah, but there's so many fights in this one that I'm almost willing to let that one go.
Yeah, that is true.
And I mean, I guess, like if this was the movie and I had never read any of the scripts, I could see being a little disappointed at it. But like personally, after having read these and read that fight a couple of times, I'm like, okay, all right.
And so we go back to London with the same transition. And McLeod arrives home at his antique store, which in this version is located inside a refurbished church. And I'm like, okay, you're pushing the holy ground thing a little here. And he presents the Kurgan's saber to Rachel, who tells him the Kurgan could very well be dead, and to be prepared for that possibility, and she even tells him about how multiple immortals have already arrived in London for the gathering, including a Japanese immortal named Hiroki, Basile, and Castigir. And off this, we go to XL London, which is a stadium, where Castigir is attending a boxing match, but instead of watching the fight, he's staring across the arena at something, and he then heads to the parking garage where he's attacked by Facile, and a fight begins with Castigir taking his head. So we get a reference to that opening from the original movie, only with different characters.
Yeah, and just to point this out real quick, when I was watching the movie the other night, that shot is in the movie, like that, like the wrestling match, and there's that slow like kind of camera pull in to Connor kind of sitting there in the stadium, and it's like he's like kind of shadow, got the eye light going on. That's a great shot. Yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there. But I was really glad to see like it kind of like have this sort of throwback to the boxing match, instead of a wrestling match, and the fight, in the parking lot. Cool to see it come back.
And so we go to McLeod and Rachel, who see the quickening lightning strike from their window. So that's a cool little transition.
Yeah.
And they go on playing a game of Risk, which McLeod says he helped invent.
Yeah, that was a cute little line.
And she beats him and talks about how he loses something every time he gains a quickening. And then she heads off the bed, wishing her papa a good night. And we go into a flashback to 1944 Poland, where the Kurgan, who this time he's using his assumed name from the original movie of Victor Kruger, is a Nazi SS officer who is occupying a hotel along with the German top brass. And the band is performing I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire. And the Kurgan is threatening a Jewish couple with a young baby who, from what we get from the dialogue, is that they basically sold out the rest of their community in order to keep themselves alive. And the guards bring in a prisoner who turns out to be McLeod. And he keeps the Kurgan talking until a bombing raid occurs, drawn there by a transponder McLeod is carrying. And he's about to fight the Kurgan, but he elects to try to save the mother and baby, only finding the latter alive when he emerges from the rubble.
So, yeah, this, I think, was the best version of this scene in particular. And it was really neat, reading through these and finally, I like this idea from the start, but it was really neat seeing it, the culmination of it, it's okay, they finally really got this. Because, before, Rachel, when the bombs happened, Rachel's just, a baby that just happens to be there, right? There's no rhyme or reason to any of it. Yeah. So it was neat to see them kind of pull that together. It was neat to see them do the what you said, about how Rachel's parents probably sold out, their friends and family, and we all know how Kurgan feels about that. And that was great. The only thing that kind of was I think probably would have needed to be rewritten. They probably just would. I'm sure they probably wouldn't have so much been rewritten so much as they just wouldn't have done the lines where he's making cracks about American cereal.
Oh, the Wheaties. Yeah, the Breakfast of Champions.
I think it was bad. Just it's one of those things that's it works on paper, but I'm trying to imagine him actually saying the lines, and I'm
imagining the infamous Harrison Ford quote where he said, "You can write this shit, George, but you sure as hell can't say it."
Yeah.
Okay, so we then go back to the present day where Brenda arrives at the antique store and begins asking Rachel about the sword in the crime scene photo, which has been cropped. And then Rachel realizes what must be going on and manages to bluff her into leaving after Brenda gives Rachel her card. And McLeod decides to follow up on this, finding her hotel room and breaking into it, accessing her laptop to see what she knows. And she walks in on him and begins questioning him about how he stayed young and all that, but McLeod keeps his silence. And also I should mention he is going under the Russell Nash name in the present day in this draft.
Oh yeah, he is.
It's just barely mentioned, but it's there.
Yeah.
And he reads a scan of the Russian documents, seeing that it's a list of German prisoners held in the Siberian camp, with the Kurgan's assumed name of Victor Kruger among them. And having been told that the Philadelphia immortal was shot first and then beheaded, he realizes what must be going on. And it's a guy he personally knows named Dominic Verone, which is not a hugely important detail, but I remembered that. And we go to Siberia, where Soon, who got the location off those documents, and you get the idea that she shot the guy with her pistol sword and then took his head off, is leading an excavation team which has found the door to a World War II era prison. And inside they find a lot of skeletons, that Nazi pin again, and the Kurgan sealed up inside a special cell, shackled to the wall by his neck. And Soon taunts him about the gathering being so close and goes to take his head, but the shackle is in the way. And she has one of her men shoot it off, which sets off a chain reaction, impaling them with stakes that the Kurgan had set up. So, okay.
Made out of bones, right? So he used the bones of the fellow inmate.
Or rats or something. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's better than the last one. I liked it. I like the concept of him having set a trap. But since this is the last time we're going to talk about this bit in particular, yeah, I would have rather seen, I would have rather not seen the trap. I would have liked to have seen because I think the idea of Kurgan, the visual look of Kurgan being all emaciated and haggard, Shang Tsung looking, that's really a striking image, and it's scary. And I'd really like to see I think it would have been cooler had Kurgan just come at them. Maybe cut her head off with his hands or something, pop her head or something.
Or maybe played weaker than he actually was.
Yeah.
In order to get close. And also it's mentioned that she has a modernized version of the pistol sword, so it's much more powerful now. But so he, keeping his promise from the past, he lets her live but leaves her behind, eventually stumbling into a farmhouse. And you think he's going to kill this couple, but instead he just sits down and starts eating dinner. So back in London, McLeod leaves Brenda at the hotel and heads back to his penthouse, where Rachel alerts him that the Swiss bank accounts they've been monitoring for years have now been used, and they see surveillance footage of the Kurgan entering the bank. And so Rachel is also overcome with worry about the gathering and what it will mean for McLeod. And he leaves and takes a walk, running into Castigear, and they eat dinner at a gastropub, and Castigear just hates the food.
Yeah.
And they discuss the gathering and the fact that McLeod doesn't care about it before toasting to having a good run. And I like that this scene is in here because one of the scenes that was lost in that fire from the original movie was them out, drinking together and spending a little more time together.
Yeah, getting to know the character a little bit.
Elsewhere in London, the Kurgan is in a barber's shop and he's whistling "I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire," getting shaved when a Russian immortal walks in, but flees when he sees who it is. And I like the idea that the Kurgan has such a reputation that people don't want to fight him.
Yeah, I love that would be a great shot, like where he's like, the immortal comes in and like looks at him and basically gets his pants and is just like walked out backwards and then just like see him running like through the window.
Yep. And then the Kurgan finishes the shave and follows the Russian immortal, and we see a flash of light from the ensuing quickening. And we catch up with Brenda in her hotel room where she gets a call from her editor berating her for, going out on using the travel budget for something she shouldn't have before quitting her job right then and there. And it's actually really funny because at first she pretends to have a cold and he goes, "Come off it, I know you're in China." And she goes, "Actually, I'm in London now."
Yep.
And she then
calls back and then quit.
Yeah, and so she then discovers that McLeod has taken his current name of Russell Nash from a deceased toddler who died at a time that matches up with his outward appearance of age. And we then go to McLeod's pub, which is in this again. It's set up as a tribute to Ramirez, and it's mentioned it's on holy ground, but it doesn't fully explain it. Where he's met by Soon, who gives him the Castigear's current address in London, and she's looking at Ramirez's portrait with regret, and you get the idea here that they had kind of had a thing at one time, but by that point Ramirez had just given up on love at that point because of his wives that had all died, and so it's all nice little bit of character development.
I like that.
And so McLeod, he's heading out to find the Kurgan, and Brenda is following him. He spots her, tells her to get in his car to take her back to the hotel, saying it's not safe. But he then senses an immortal and gets rammed by a delivery truck driven by the Kurgan before they can get anywhere. Brenda is knocked out cold, and McLeod manages to get her out of the car as the Kurgan approaches. He says that he gained clarity of purpose while locked up in the prison and continues to fight, saying that he feels that the phrase, "there can be only one," means not only one immortal, but only one person left on Earth, and that humanity was God's mistake, and that the prize is the power to correct it, at least in his view. And then you get a really lame kind of like fight scene line where McLeod says, "I'm going to correct his biggest mistake by killing you."
Yeah, that was a bad line. That whole, that whole, because it's like it's like his after he hits them and gets out, he like monologues at them for like a page, and it's not great. And I'll take that over like the quiet of the last, but could have done without that.
And so they fight. McLeod's katana gets knocked out of his hands, and they move on to a bridge where the Kurgan impales McLeod with he has a whole new sword that he's picked up, and the whole thing with the Kurgan saber just completely disappears from the script by this point. So he has a whole new sword. It's called a tactical sword. And McLeod pulls himself along the blade and headbutts the Kurgan until they both fall off the bridge and get hit by a train. And Brenda, who picked up McLeod's katana, finds him as he pulls the Kurgan's sword out of his torso and helps him get away while the Kurgan is left lying there. And they return to McLeod's penthouse, where Brenda sees how quickly his wound is healed, and he shows her his secret room dedicated to his long life, photos, mementos, and weapons. And they have a brief romantic moment where Brenda, for no reason at all, pins on Heather's Luckenbooth, but it's over fairly quickly.
Yeah.
They talk some more with Brenda mentioning that she quit her job and won't be writing the story anymore, so she's less of a bitch in this version. And McLeod trying to explain what receiving a quickening is like, but he can't really put it into words. And they're interrupted by Rachel, who wants a word alone with McLeod, and she tells him to take a chance on Brenda like he took one on me, and then shows him a news report about the Kurgan fight. And so he then calls a meeting with the remaining immortals at his pub, and it's Soon, Castigear, Hiroki, and the Kurgan. He tells them that they're getting sloppy by fighting out in public and suggests a more isolated location, to which they all agree. And I like this, because it always makes me wonder in the show and in the movies why they always just randomly fight in public, why they never try and set it up to be like less conspicuous.
Have an audience, man.
And so back in his secret vault, McLeod is looking over some weapons, his old kilt, and a painting of the Battle of Pinky Clook, and tells Brenda that they'll pick up their conversation when he gets back, his expression showing that he doubts he'll return, and then he leaves, driving off. Eventually arriving in Scotland, and Brenda looks at the painting, then at a Desert Eagle in a display case, and gets an idea, taking the gun and one of McLeod's sports cars and following him. And it turns out that the location McLeod selected for the gathering is the Musselburgh Racecourse in Musselburgh, Scotland, built on the site of the Battle of Pinky Clook, and we see them all entering the building from different directions. Now, bit of a problem here. They say they're in the Highlands, and that area is actually in the Lowlands, but minor problem.
Yeah, and I like the idea of them going back to there, and that's like where the big final battle is going to take place. But I'm like, but in a race course? Like, I mean, I guess it could be cool, but, and I mean, if that's what's actually there, then what are you going to do?
That is a real place.
But, yeah, so I mean, I guess if that's what's actually located on that land now, then, I mean, you got to do it. I wasn't a big fan of it like actually taking place on a race, but that's just a nitpick, I guess, because the fight itself is awesome.
I mean, I'm fine with it. I mean, the final fight in the original movie takes place in a big room.
True.
So McLeod, he runs into Hiroki first, fighting him and taking his head in honorable combat. Then Castigear runs into Soon, who unloads her modernized pistol sword into him before taking his head, running to the racecourse's chapel so she'll be protected when the quickening strikes and temporarily weakens her. And this is where we see it connect for the first time, where the clouds build, the lightning strikes, and they rise up into the air while it's happening.
Yeah, and it melts the roof, and what does it say?
It like twists the building around them.
Yeah, and it like causes it to like the ceiling, like the roof looks like a rose, like opening up. That's awesome.
It says, when the lightning pierces Soon's chest, an unseen force twists the structure of the roof. All the components of the building sliding and fusing together. The entire roof is being torn open and opens up like a flower, but doesn't fall apart and crumble. We see the funnel structure being shaped. Because you see the aftermath of that before, and you actually finally see it happen here. And the Kurgan finds her there and just goes, screw this. He picks her up and tosses her out the door.
Yep.
Which I think is really cool. He gets attacked by McLeod, though, when the fight is on, and things don't go so well for McLeod because the Kurgan hurls him out the window where he gets impaled on the starting gate, which just sounds painful.
Yeah, out.
Which this immobilizes him, and Soon approaches, and he encourages her to take his head, talking about how, Ramirez said, I have to give up and I'll let you defeat him. And in a moment in self-reflection, she refuses, saying that Ramirez believed in him. And so she decides to walk off and face the Kurgan. And she decides to fight him honorably, throwing the pistol sword aside and pulling out a normal sword. And she loses, but she calmly accepts her death, which I thought was a nice character moment.
Yeah, some growth there.
And then the Kurgan arrives on the racecourse to fight McLeod, and the two of them go at it, both of them performing the kinetic displacement thing for a little while. And then they clash, throwing both of them and dazing McLeod, and the Kurgan moves to take advantage of this, but Brenda arrives and she fires off the Desert Eagle at him, missing every shot but keeping him distracted, and that's a big gun, too.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's a Magnum.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
It's a one-hit kill in Uncharted, I know that.
Yeah, it's true. One-hit kill in Resident Evil, too. I can only see, like, hit missing every shot. Yeah, with one of those bad boys, I can see that. Pistols are really hard to fire. Like, pistols are actually kind of hard to get accurate at any kind of a distance. Yeah, so.
They're not, handguns are not known for their accuracy over more than 10 feet.
Right.
But no, she manages to hit him a couple of times, enough to knock him down, and she heads for McLeod. But then the Kurgan stands back up and grabs her because she's now out of ammo, and mortally wounds her with his sword. And this infuriates McLeod, who fights with a newfound ferocity, and he's just going out with juke. This fight's really cool.
Yeah, it is.
However, the Kurgan is still too strong, but something happens. He begins to use this specific move that McLeod was training against with Ramirez, and the implication is that Ramirez is inside the Kurgan somewhere and is helping from within.
Yeah, which is cool. I like that.
And so McLeod takes advantage of this to take the Kurgan's head, and then he runs to Brenda's side, clutching her to him as the mother of all quickenings descends, which hits both of them at the same time, levitating them into the air before making a crater, and the aftershock levels the racecourse. It looks for a moment that Brenda is still dead, and we see that a mysterious man, which is his only name, with a V tattoo, like the priest from earlier has been watching, and makes a call. And here he's specifically described as being a watcher, where it's compared in the script to being like S.H.I.E.L.D. in the Highlander universe. Now, there's something from the TV show. They're this secret society that's been following and observing and taking down the stories of the immortals since the beginning. And they've been doing it in secret, never interfering. And then they get found out because there's rogues within them who decide they're going to hunt down the immortals themselves to keep the prize from being won.
Huh, okay.
So I like the fact that the script actually acknowledges some of the cool lore building from the TV show.
Yeah. So they bring that in.
And it's then that MacLeod senses another immortal and Brenda comes to, and it turns out that the final quickening went into her instead, making her one of them. That is a nice little twist there.
Yeah.
And they kiss, and from there we go to the Watcher headquarters in Istanbul, where the mysterious man brings a report to the Lord Watcher, who, remaining unseen, adds to an ancient volume on the Kurgan, and you get the idea that he's, putting the last little entry into that particular book. And the mysterious man says that the prize hasn't been claimed and that 24 immortal rebirths have been reported since the Kurgan's defeat. So I actually kind of like this way of ending it without ending it. And the Lord Watcher is revealed as Christopher Lambert. I love that. That was amazing. Who comments that 24 is unfortunate and that they shall watch as they have always done. And that's where it ends until a post-credits sequence, because we're going to be Marvel-like now.
I was just getting ready to say, and the Marvel sequence.
Yep, and MacLeod and Brenda, they arrive at the Ramirez estate, where she talks about writing a book based on her experiences, where that dialogue is a little silly. But MacLeod goes in ahead of her, and she stops to look at herself in the mirror when she starts to whistle, "I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire," the same song that the Kurgan had been whistling, and it ends, and you're left wondering what just happened.
Yeah, and the implication there is really... I liked it. I was like, okay, all right, that's dark.
I liked it, because one of the things that comes up in the TV show is that if you take a quickening, there's a chance, if it's from a particularly strong immortal, that it can change you in some way. And my understanding is that later on in the show, they do a little bit more with that than they have already, but I haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, really strong ending.
Yeah, that ending just makes me want to see this movie.
Yeah, oh yeah. This was the Highlander remake that, very, very little about this that I think should have been cut. And it's the kind of thing that I have no doubt that, like I said earlier, the kind of stuff that, I have no doubt that while they were filming it, they'd probably be like, oh no, that wouldn't work. That dialogue doesn't really work, or
yeah,
doesn't look good. But beginning to end, this was excellent.
Yeah, this one is great. This one, I really like the Rosenberg Draft too, but I think of the ones we have, this one is, those two kind of vie for my favorite.
Yeah, okay. This one is my favorite. I have a soft spot for the first one.
That one's good too. That one's really good. That's a hard one to dismiss.
Like I said about the first one, the dialogue's real clunky, but it's a first draft. It's just supposed to be nuts and bolts. You get the idea. But yeah. This one was great. The Oppenheim draft was awful. Slog to get through. The Rosenberg draft, see, you really liked it, and I liked it, but I don't know. I'd almost put I didn't have as many problems. Oh, hang on. Okay. I didn't have as many problems with the Wibberleys Draft. Really? As we were going through it and you're pointing it out, totally. The opening in Pakistan, boy, when I was reading it, I didn't realize how much of that dragged. Just the back and forth. Yeah.
Well, you see, it's not even so much that I think the script as a whole is bad. It's just there's a couple things that really just go about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is, okay, so continue on with where this went after this. Is that Cedric Nicholas Troyan was still attached to direct, and in the midst of writing this, so before this draft was actually turned in, the studio was they were looking to get Tom Cruise to play Ramirez, but he was too busy working on Mission Impossible 5 to really consider any other.
How do you feel about that?
I really like the guy as an actor, but I'm trying to imagine him doing Ramirez. If you got cast an immortal, that's the guy.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know, I don't know. I have a hard time thinking. I know back when this whole thing, when they first started kicking around the idea of a Highlander remake, I remember one of my buddies telling me that he thought Liam Neeson would make a good Ramirez.
I could see that.
I've been thinking the whole time. I've kind of been thinking who would you get? The Sean Connery factor is kind of interesting because he's the character everybody remembers from the movie. And you really want a movie star, not just an actor, but a movie star to play the character. And I'm I think Tom Cruise would have been okay. And
I think maybe
you said that was for this script, right?
Yeah, it would have been around this time.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I could have seen that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, but I mean, who knows if he would have maybe turned it into more of his movie? You never know.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Yeah, probably. And I know he has a problem with dying in his movies. He doesn't like to die because that's like, I remember a while ago hearing that the Warner Brothers was courting him to play Hal Jordan. I think Hal for the Green Lantern movie, and it was going to be like a buddy cop space movie, which is what everybody wants. But at the end, Hal Jordan was going to die of this draft.
Save that for the sequel.
Yeah, really. But yeah, he walked away from that because he doesn't like playing characters that die. So I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? But yeah, there's another actor whom I've never actually heard of before I started reading into this who was rumored to play the role after that. He's a guy called James Jason Bryan, who's Irish of Spanish descent, and he totally looks the part.
Yeah, I think I saw a picture of him. Hang on one second.
But I've never actually seen him act in anything. And he's apparently like trained in mixed martial arts.
Yeah, I could see that, but I don't know. I haven't seen him in anything. So
I mean, that's still a rumor. And then it would have been for this version too. In February 2015, this is when Dave Bautista was cast as the Kurgan.
Yeah, and I read that too on the wiki page. I don't know. How do you feel about that one?
I feel like at the time I was kind of on it, but then I started seeing him in some more roles where he played them a little bit more straight, and I think I almost feel like I kind of have to wait to see what he does as that one character in Dune, just to get an idea of him as a villain.
Is he playing Duncan, or is that Aquaman?
Aquaman's playing Duncan. He's playing Raban.
Oh, okay. I could see him as the Kirk, but I don't know if I could see him as this Kurgan.
Maybe not.
Because Batista's, I mean, like, I think he is, like, a legitimately good actor. But, like, he's a little, I don't know, the way this character acts and the lines of dialogue he speaks, that would have to be really rewritten for him, I think.
Mm-hmm. I can see what you mean. And then, so Cedric Nicholas Troyan was still apparently involved, and then he went off to make his debut on, instead of this, he did The Huntsman Winter's War, that prequel to Snow White and the Huntsman that nobody went to see.
Oh, wow, I forgot that was even a thing.
Yeah, I did too, to be honest with you. And then later, that came out in 2016.
Yeah.
And then later that year, that was when it was in November that Chad Stahelski was confirmed to direct. You know, the guy, this was in between John Wick 1 and 2, which I think is interesting. They got that offer before 2 was even out.
Oh, yeah.
And in 2017, late 2017, there's a report here. I've only ever seen this mentioned once, that Andrew Barber and Gabriel Ferrari, who wrote Ant-Man and the Wasp, and and this was before that movie even came out, that they were apparently, looked at to write the script for him. And I don't know about that.
Yeah, actually, come to think of it, did he write John Wick, or did he just direct it?
He just directed it.
Okay.
But I know that, like, it was, but I mean, the same guy has worked on all 3 movies in the writing department. But I mean, I don't know about those 2 writers writing it, because Ant-Man and the Wasp is probably at the bottom of my list of Marvel movies.
I have, that's one of the few I haven't seen yet.
But so they wrote that, and then later in 2018, Ryan J. Condal was hired to write the script, and he's written some interesting stuff. I mean, most of his stuff I've read has been unproduced, but he wrote a spec script called Galahad, which was a fairly interesting deconstruction of the Arthur myth. Yeah, that one's he contributed to Paradise Lost, which that was an interesting script.
Okay.
And he was the showrunner of the show called The Colony, which I never saw. He was supposed to be the showrunner for that Amazon Conan series that got quietly canceled with no real explanation as to why.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that, and then nothing.
And he also, so a lot of his produced credits aren't that great. Like, he worked on The Rock's version of Hercules, which that was probably because the comic wasn't very good, I'm guessing.
That's based on the comic?
Yeah, it was called The Thracian Wars. I'm guessing it wasn't very good.
Fair enough.
And he was one of 3 writers to work on it. And he also worked on Rampage, which was another Rock movie, which I actually didn't mind.
Yeah, that one wasn't too bad.
But yeah, so I'm curious, do you think any of these scripts has survived into the Stahelski version, or do you think he went in a completely different direction?
Yeah, right. So that is the question. How much of this do you think will be in the movie when it eventually gets made? And outside of the broad strokes Highlander storyline.
I know that Stahelski, I saw an interview with him where he said that they will be saving The Gathering for a sequel, that they won't be going into it in the first movie.
Okay, so that leads me to believe might possibly be like a almost entirely a period piece.
That, or they just don't do The Gathering at the ending.
See, I'm not a fan of that idea. I'm not a fan of like going into something like this. I mean, I know that's how Hollywood works, but I'm not a fan of like the idea of going into it wants like go and more than just sequel bait, like actually like not giving us the story or the end of the story.
I mean, I'm thinking it could be more along the lines of they will tell a complete story about Connor McLeod with a character arc, but they'll just save the idea of a big gathering for a sequel if they get one.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, if that is the way they go with it, then yeah, no, I don't know, because I was gonna say that I thought for sure that like the Kurgan getting trapped in the gulag would be there, because great idea. I mean, that's really fucking good idea.
Yeah.
And probably that one transition scene that I liked, because that's in almost every draft after it shows up. Yeah, like that scene, and what else would probably show up? Now I'm trying to think of like what would show up that wasn't directly linked to The Gathering, and more importantly, like what would show up that was like from the flashbacks,
the training and stuff like that.
The poor Viking warrior.
Yeah, he would show up. The Kurgan saber getting put in the museum would probably show up.
Yeah, that's true. It makes me wonder if they're gonna do. Yeah, that's a good question. I wonder if they're gonna do the Kurgan saber like being in the hands of another person, and like that initial, I guess, like minor plot twist that the guy at the beginning isn't the Kurgan.
Yeah, and he's a different person in every draft.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, so yeah, it is hard to say.
Curious, like, I'm real curious, like, visually how the movie's gonna look, because I mean, I know, like, judging by the John Wick movies, like, visually it's gonna be really good, and it's gonna have like good shot composition for the most part, and decent action scenes. That actually gets me really excited. The fact that the guy that directed John Wick is gonna be doing it just for like the action scenes alone.
Yeah, I'd imagine the fight scenes would look something like the bit from Chapter 3 where they're fighting with like all the weapons they're grabbing out of cases near the beginning.
Yeah, man, I hope for the best for this, and I think it's in mostly good hands. I can't imagine that the director will go with a shoddy script. I mean, it's I don't think it's gonna like change the world.
No,
but I don't think he's gonna go with like a bad script. And I think that the action will probably be really friggin' good.
We do know Stahelski's still working on it, because he mentioned just like early last month that like he was working on refining the script and stuff like that through the lockdown.
Yeah, well, I guess he's got plenty of time to do it.
So I'm guessing if he gets to it, it'll be after John Wick 4, because that's officially a go.
That's really a thing that's going to happen. Oh, God.
Yeah, and it's supposed to. Apparently, the thing that's holding that up is because they would go back to start working on it, but they can't until Keanu finishes his commitment to Matrix 4, because that got interrupted. Damn
it. That's right. That's a thing that's actually happening. I guess closing thoughts here. I thoroughly enjoyed this. This was fun. It was really, like, I think I said it earlier on at the beginning of the podcast, and I'll say it again. It was one of the things I really liked about this. See, when I read scripts, I don't usually tend to read like draft after draft after draft after draft unless the drafts are radically different, like the Alien 3 draft, completely different stories. And at first, I was really excited because the first draft and the second draft were basically completely different stories, and then like it kind of set in a little bit. But it was kind of neat, like seeing the evolution of the story and kind of seeing them like trying different things and nailing it down. It kind of gave me like a look into like the screenwriting process when it comes to like studio movies. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, because we actually get every step of the process here.
Yeah, which is kind of a rarity.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many where it's like I'm close to having all of them. Like I'm trying to get as many Uncharted scripts as I can, just because I want to see that evolution. But so many of them I can't get because they're watermarked.
Oh,
but yeah, that's a shame. But no, one last thing I wanted to point out about this: could you imagine how complicated the arbitration process would be for writing credits if they made that last draft into a movie?
Yeah, Yeah, really.
Everybody would be vying for screenplay credit. Everybody.
Well, yeah, it's like it's 50%, I think, in order to get the screenwriting credit as opposed because I would assume that Art Marcum and Matt Holloway would continue to get the story by credits.
Yeah, they.
But yeah, because it's like I mean Alex C really like I said like he knocked it out of the park. He really nailed everything. But like yeah, like there's really a lot from I would say like the Wibberleys stuff is really kind of there the whole time. So yeah, that's a good question. It'd be like, oh God, what's one of those movies? I think The Relic, the 1990s monster movie, was the same way, where it had like 8 different people for the screenplay credit, and then like 12 different people for the story by credit.
Oh wow, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what there's some of those where it's just like an absolutely complicated list of people and like, but yeah, I think we've covered this one.
Oh yeah. Woof.
Yeah, so that was a really interesting process of mostly good scripts.
Yeah, and like I said, like if anyone out there is listening and they're interested in this, I suggest the Alex C script. Yeah, if you get your hands on any of them other than, in my opinion here, the Oppenheim script, give it a shot.
But with that being said, hope you guys out there who are listening to this enjoyed the episode, and until next time, however long it takes me to edit this thing, bye.
See you later.